Part 1, the inciting incident. First class is for paying customers, not scholarship cases. Pick up your things and move to the back of the plane. Now, Karen Reynolds' voice cut through the first-class cabin like a blade, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. Her perfectly pressed Skyway Airlines uniform with its gleaming senior flight attendant wings couldn't disguise the contempt in her expression as she loomed over 16-year-old Zoe Jackson. Zoe froze, one hand still placing her worn backpack into the overhead compartment. She looked down at her boarding pass, then back at the flight attendant. There must be a mistake. My boarding pass says 3A. Zoe's voice remained calm despite the public humiliation unfolding. She held out the document with its clear first-class designation and seat assignment. Karen snatched the boarding pass, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. Her French manicured nails tapped impatiently against the paper, while her eyes flicked between the ticket and Zoe's simple jeans and NASA hoodie. This doesn't look right. Our first-class section has been overbooked. Karen's lips thinned as she looked from the boarding pass to Zoe with naked skepticism. How exactly did you get this ticket? Some kind of diversity program giving away seats meant for business travelers. The question hung in the air, loaded with insinuation. Several first-class passengers glanced up from their pre-flight routines. An elderly couple exchanged uncomfortable looks. A businessman with salt and pepper hair paused mid-sip of his complimentary orange juice. The National Young Innovators Program provided it. I'm presenting at, Zoe began explaining. Young Innovator. Karen's eyebrows shot up in theatrical disbelief. Right, and I'm Amelia Earhart. She gestured to another flight attendant, Miguel Hernandez, who approached with visible reluctance. Miguel, we have a seating discrepancy. This young lady needs to be relocated to economy. Immediately. Miguel checked his tablet, frowning slightly. The system shows 3A as occupied by Jackson. Zoe, I don't see any overbooking flag. There's been a system error, Karen insisted, her voice hardening. Look again. First class is completely full today. Zoe stood quietly, acutely aware of the stares from surrounding passengers. Her hand instinctively went to the conference lanyard in her pocket, her credentials and validation, but she resisted the urge to pull it out. Years of navigating predominantly white spaces had taught her when to pick her battles and when strategic patience served better than immediate confrontation. I can show you my conference invitation, Zoe offered, reaching for her phone. That won't be necessary. Karen's smile was tight and didn't reach her eyes. System errors happen all the time with these special allocations. Miguel, please find her an appropriate seat in economy. Miguel hesitated, looking between his tablet and Karen's stern expression. I'm not seeing any of... Are you questioning my authority as senior cabin staff? Karen's whisper was sharp enough to make Miguel step back. 15 years of experience tells me when someone doesn't belong up here. No, of course not. He turned to Zoe with an apologetic expression. Miss, if you could come with me. Zoe glanced around the first-class cabin. 6 of the 12 seats remained empty, clearly contradicting Karen's claim about overbooking. The morning flight from Chicago to Washington, D.C. was under capacity, even in economy. My presentation materials are in my carry-on, Zoe said, pointing to her backpack. I need to review them during the flight. You can do that just as easily from economy, Karen replied, reaching up and roughly pulling Zoe's backpack from the overhead bin. The bag's zipper, already straining from age, gave way under the force. Books, papers, and a scientific calculator tumbled onto the first-class cabin floor. A collective gasp rose from the watching passengers. Zoe knelt quickly, gathering her scattered belongings. A hardcover book with advanced aerodynamics and fuel efficiency emblazoned on the cover slid toward the elderly woman's feet. Another text on algorithmic approaches to aviation sustainability landed near the businessman's polished shoes. I'm so sorry, Zoe murmured, her composure finally cracking as she scrambled to collect her things. Let me help you, offered the elderly woman, but Karen stepped between them. That won't be necessary. Mrs. Wilson, we need to expedite boarding. Karen's voice had shifted to syrupy sweetness for the older passenger. We wouldn't want to delay our first-class service. Zoe managed to stuff her belongings back into the damaged backpack, the conference lanyard momentarily visible before she tucked it away again. The elderly woman, Wilson, caught a glimpse of the prestigious logo but said nothing. This way, please. Miguel gestured toward the economy section, genuine discomfort evident in his expression. As Zoe followed him, Karen called after them loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear, "Be sure to place her in an appropriate middle seat. Miguel, we have paying passengers in economy who deserve the window and aisle positions." The businessman who had been watching the scene unfold discreetly removed his phone from his pocket and began recording. His name was James Rodriguez, and his expression darkened as he watched Zoe being escorted away. "Boarding pass," Karen barked at the next passenger waiting in the aisle, a professional-looking woman in her 50s with short gray hair and glasses. Amanda Peterson, according to her conference badge, which matched the design of the one Zoe had quickly hidden away. "Did I just witness what I think I witnessed?" Dr. Peterson asked quietly, her eyes following Zoe's retreating form. "Just a routine seating adjustment," Karen replied dismissively. "Your seat is 2C? Welcome aboard Skyway Airlines." Dr. Peterson didn't move. That young woman had a first-class boarding pass. "There was a system error," Karen repeated, her professional smile straining. "Now, if you could please take your seat. We need to complete boarding." Dr. Peterson made her way to 2C, but her eyes remained fixed on the interaction happening in economy. Miguel was trying to find Zoe a seat, looking increasingly uncomfortable as Karen's instructions conflicted with available space. Back in economy, Zoe found herself directed to 27E, a middle seat in the back of the aircraft between two already occupied aisle and window positions. The overhead bins in this section were already full, forcing her to place her damaged backpack under the seat in front, further limiting her already cramped legroom. "I'm sorry about this," Miguel whispered as he helped her adjust the bag. "If there's anything you need during the flight." "It's fine," Zoe replied quietly. "I'm used to it." Those 4 words hung in the air between them. Miguel's expression shifted as the implication sank in. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Karen's voice over the intercom. "Miguel, please return to first class for pre-departure service." As Miguel made his way back to the front, he passed James Rodriguez, who had left his first-class seat and was now standing in the aisle with his phone held discreetly at waist level, camera clearly recording. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," Miguel began. "I'm just stretching my legs before the flight," James replied calmly. "My doctor recommends it for circulation." His phone continued recording as Karen approached a passenger who had just settled into the first-class seat that should have been Zoe's. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Davis," Karen beamed, offering a warm towel and taking his jacket. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, orange juice, water, or perhaps champagne?" The contrast in treatment was stark and unmistakable. James's phone captured it all. Back in her cramped middle seat, Zoe pulled out her presentation notes. Tomorrow she would be presenting her groundbreaking algorithm for optimizing fuel efficiency in commercial aircraft to a room full of aviation executives and FAA officials. Her work could potentially save airlines billions while reducing carbon emissions significantly, if anyone took a 16-year-old black girl from Chicago's South Side seriously. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very industry her innovation could help was currently treating her like an unwelcome intruder. Her seatmates, a large man already spilling into her space and a woman aggressively claiming both armrests, made reviewing her materials nearly impossible. The tray table barely opened fully in the restricted space. Up in first class, the remaining passengers continued boarding. Dr. Peterson had taken out her laptop but wasn't working. Instead, she was watching the flight attendant interactions closely. The elderly couple, Harold and Meredith Wilson, according to their matching luggage tags, whispered to each other while glancing back toward economy. A timestamp appeared on the cabin screens, boarding 45 minutes until departure. Karen moved efficiently through the first-class cabin, offering beverages and hanging jackets. Each interaction was performed with textbook customer service excellence, a stark contrast to her treatment of Zoe. James Rodriguez continued his leg stretching, making his way back toward economy while recording. As he passed row 27, he paused. "Excuse me, miss," he addressed Zoe quietly. "I saw what happened up front. It's completely unacceptable. Is there anything I can do?" Zoe looked up, surprised by the offer. "I'm fine, really. I just need to review my presentation before we land." "Presentation?" James raised an eyebrow. "National Aviation Innovation Conference. I'm speaking tomorrow on fuel efficiency algorithms that could reduce consumption by 12.7% across commercial fleets. James's expression changed from sympathy to genuine interest. I'm with Meridian Technologies. We develop flight management systems. I'll be at that conference too. Before Zoe could respond, Karen appeared beside them. Sir, I must insist you return to your seat immediately. We're preparing for departure, and the captain has requested all passengers be seated. Her eyes narrowed at their interaction. The timestamp on the screens changed. Boarding 38 minutes until departure. James nodded politely and made his way back to first class. As he passed Dr. Peterson, he leaned over slightly. Did you catch what just happened? Every bit of it, she confirmed quietly. I'm sending emails right now. That young woman is presenting right before my session tomorrow. In the cockpit, Captain Thomas Blackwell completed his pre-flight checks, unaware of the situation unfolding in the cabin. As one of Skyway's most experienced pilots and the only African-American captain based in Chicago, he ran a professional operation with zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. Flight 2187, this is Chicago ground. You're cleared for pushback in approximately 35 minutes. Roger that. Ground. Flight 2187 standing by. Captain Blackwell responded, completely unaware that a storm was brewing just behind his cockpit door, one that would soon engulf the entire flight, the airline, and eventually, the industry itself. Karen returned to the front galley, where Miguel was preparing the first-class service cart. Was that really necessary? He asked quietly, keeping his voice low. There are 6 empty seats up here. Do not question me in front of passengers, Karen hissed. That girl clearly got that ticket through some diversity program. She wouldn't know what to do with first-class service if it came with an instruction manual. Did you see her clothes? That hoodie probably cost $20 at Target. Miguel looked away, uncomfortable with the conversation but unwilling to challenge his senior colleague further. He'd been with Skyway Airlines for only 7 months. Karen had been there 15 years. Besides, Karen continued, mistaking his silence for agreement, standards matter. First class isn't just about the ticket, it's about maintaining an atmosphere. Our premium passengers don't pay thousands to sit next to someone who doesn't belong. You'll understand when you've been in the industry longer. The elderly couple, Harold and Meredith Wilson, were now openly discussing the incident. That poor girl, Meredith whispered. Did you see her textbooks? They look like college level at least. Reminds me of our granddaughter, Harold replied. Same age, same intelligence in her eyes. I don't like this one bit. Meredith. James Rodriguez had returned to his seat and was now quietly airdropping the video he'd recorded to other passengers with iPhones. A notification appeared on Dr. Peterson's phone. James R. would like to share a video with you. She accepted immediately, watching with growing outrage as the footage confirmed what she'd witnessed. The boarding process continued, but something had shifted in the first-class cabin. Passengers exchanged glances. Phones emerged from pockets. Messages were sent. What had begun as one woman's biased decision had catalyzed a moment of collective witness that would continue to gain momentum long after the flight landed in Washington, D.C. And in row 27, squeezed into a middle seat that was never meant to be hers, Zoe Jackson took a deep breath and focused on her notes. Tomorrow she would stand in front of industry leaders and demonstrate her brilliance. Today she would endure with dignity, as she had been taught to do her entire life. Little did she know that the true demonstration of her character was already underway, and the aviation industry would indeed be transformed, though not in the way she had originally planned. Part 2, Initial Reactions. Excuse me, flight attendant, but I believe there's been a serious mistake. Doctor. Amanda Peterson's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding lecture halls and boardrooms. She had risen from her first-class seat and was now standing in the aisle, deliberately positioning herself where other passengers could witness the interaction. Karen turned, her professional smile sliding into place. Yes, ma'am, how can I help you? The young woman you just relocated, she clearly had a valid first-class boarding pass. Dr. Peterson's tone was measured but firm. And I count 6 empty seats in this cabin, which directly contradicts your claim about overbooking. Several passengers looked up from their phones and tablets. The elderly couple, Harold and Meredith Wilson, nodded in agreement. I appreciate your concern, Karen replied, her voice artificially sweet. But I assure you there's been a system error in our booking platform. It happens occasionally with certain promotional tickets. Promotional tickets. Dr. Peterson raised an eyebrow. Yes, charity cases, scholarship programs, that sort of thing. Karen's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. Those sometimes slip through the system incorrectly. Real first-class passengers have paid thousands for their seats, not received them as handouts. James Rodriguez, still recording discreetly, captured every word. That's fascinating, Dr. Peterson replied, her tone making it clear she found it anything but. Because I'm traveling on a scholarship-funded ticket from the same conference. Should I be concerned about my seating as well? Karen's smile faltered. Your ticket is perfectly valid. Dr. Peterson, there's no need for concern. And how exactly did you determine that hers wasn't? Dr. Peterson pressed, removing her glasses for emphasis. What specific criteria did you use to make that assessment? The entire first-class cabin had gone silent. Even the passengers in the first few rows of economy were leaning forward, trying to catch the exchange. Karen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but I've been managing cabin assignments for 15 years. I can assure you that I followed standard protocol, which protocol specifically mentions moving passengers with valid boarding pass to inferior seats while leaving premium seats empty. Peterson wasn't backing down. I'd like the exact page number in your operations manual. Please. Miguel had emerged from the galley and was watching the exchange with growing alarm. This was escalating beyond a simple seating issue. Dr. Peterson, Karen's voice dropped lower. I need to prepare the cabin for departure. Perhaps we can discuss your concerns after we're airborne. I'm not concerned for myself, Dr. Peterson replied. I'm concerned about the young innovator you've relegated to a middle seat in the back when she has work to prepare for tomorrow's conference, the same conference where I'm speaking at 11:15, right after her presentation at 10:30. The timestamp on the screens changed, boarding 32 minutes until departure. In economy, Zoe was struggling to review her notes. The tray table wobbled precariously in the limited space, and her seatmate's elbow kept nudging her materials. Sorry, the man muttered for the third time, not sounding particularly sorry at all. Zoe nodded politely, trying to make herself even smaller in the cramped space. One of her advanced aviation textbooks slid from the tray table, landing with a thud on the floor. As she bent to retrieve it, she noticed a message on her phone. This is James Rodriguez from first class. Several passengers are questioning your removal. Documentation underway. Stay calm. Help is coming. Zoe stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Throughout her academic career, she'd been advised to keep her head down and let her work speak for itself. Causing a scene had never been an option for a young black girl in predominantly white STEM spaces. Standing out for the wrong reasons could close doors forever. Back in first class, Karen was trying to regain control of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Please ensure your seats and tray tables are in their upright positions. Her voice carried a forced cheerfulness. Harold Wilson, the elderly man who had been watching the situation unfold, raised his hand. Excuse me, Miss. Karen approached with her professional smile firmly back in place. Yes, sir. How can I help you? My wife and I would be happy to give up our seats for that young lady you moved to economy. His voice was gentle but carried the moral authority of someone who'd seen enough injustice in his lifetime to recognize it instantly. We don't mind sitting further back. Karen's smile froze. That's very generous, Mr. Wilson, but I'm afraid it's not possible once seat assignments have been finalized in the system. But you just changed her seat assignment, Meredith Wilson pointed out. Surely you could do the same for us. It's a different situation entirely, Karen insisted. For security and weight distribution reasons, we can't make further changes. Weight distribution. James Rodriguez couldn't help but interject. On an Airbus A320 with 6 empty first-class seats and a 38% load factor in economy. Karen turned to him, her professional demeanor slipping. Sir, unless you're an aviation expert, I suggest you leave operational concerns to the professionals. Actually, James replied calmly, I'm an aerospace systems engineer with Meridian Technologies, specializing in flight management systems. Weight distribution would only be a factor if the aircraft were at or near capacity, which it clearly isn't. The A320's center of gravity envelope is designed to accommodate far greater passenger imbalances than a single seating change. The timestamp changed again. Boarding 28 minutes until departure. Miguel approached Karen, speaking in a hushed tone. Karen, maybe we should reconsider. The captain will be asking about the delay soon, and this is getting out of hand. The captain runs the cockpit. I run the cabin, Karen replied sharply. And I've made my decision. That girl stays where she is. Dr. Byron Peterson had returned to her seat, but was now typing furiously on her phone. The email she was composing was addressed to the Skyway Airlines Customer Service Department, with copies to the airline's corporate headquarters and the aviation conference organizers. Incident in progress on Skyway Flight 2187, she wrote. Discriminatory treatment of National Young Innovators Program finalist Zoe Jackson. Multiple witnesses, video documentation available, requesting immediate intervention before aircraft departure. Throughout the first-class cabin, similar activities were taking place. James Rodriguez had shared his video with 8 other passengers. Harold Wilson was on the phone with his grandson, a law student, asking about passenger rights. A young woman in 4D was live tweeting the incident, her follower count climbing as the hashtag Skyway shame began to gain traction. In economy, one of Zoe's seatmates had gotten up to use the lavatory, giving her a momentary reprieve from the cramped conditions. She used the opportunity to pull out her conference badge and lanyard, looking at her own photo next to the prestigious National Young Innovators Program logo. Tomorrow she would be the youngest presenter in the program's history, if she could arrive with her materials and composure intact. Her phone buzzed with another message from James. Dr. Peterson from Row 2 recognizes you from the conference program. She's making calls. Hold tight. The brewing tension was interrupted by a new voice over the intercom, the deep, authoritative tone of Captain Thomas Blackwell. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently in line for departure and should be airborne in approximately 30 minutes. The weather in Washington looks clear, giving us a smooth flight time of about 1 hour and 45 minutes. Cabin crew, please prepare for departure checks. Karen immediately moved toward the galley, gesturing for Miguel to follow. This is getting out of hand, Miguel whispered once they were out of earshot. People are recording and sending messages. I've seen at least 3 videos being airdropped between passengers. This could escalate beyond our control. Let them complain, Karen replied dismissively. Passengers always think they know better than staff. By tomorrow, no one will remember this, and that girl will learn an important lesson about where she belongs. She couldn't have been more wrong. Outside the aircraft, Sarah Martinez, the Skyway gate agent, was receiving concerning messages on her company device. The customer service email that Dr. Peterson had sent was generating automated alerts throughout the system. Additionally, the social media team had flagged the emerging hashtag Skyway shame, which had jumped from 0 to over 300 mentions in less than 15 minutes. Sarah made a quick decision and picked up the gate phone. This is gate 34. I need to board flight 2187 immediately for a customer service matter. Flight is in final boarding, came the response. Departure scheduled in 25 minutes. This is a priority customer service intervention, Sarah insisted. I'm coming aboard now. In the first-class cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from individual concern to collective action. Dr. Peterson had left her seat again, this time moving through the cabin with purpose, speaking quietly to other passengers. The elderly couple was showing James's video to the passenger across the aisle. A businessman who had initially seemed uninvolved was now on his phone, describing the situation to someone on the other end. Yes, I'm witnessing it personally, boss, he said. The discriminatory intent is unmistakable. The man was Benjamin Taylor, an off-duty Skyway employee who recognized a PR disaster in the making. Karen emerged from the galley, immediately noticing the changed atmosphere. Passengers who had been passive observers were now actively engaged, their attention focused not on their pre-flight routines but on her. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, trying to regain control. We'll be commencing our safety demonstration shortly. Please direct your attention to the screens. Excuse me, Dr. Peterson interrupted. But before we proceed, I'd like to understand the specific policy that allows Skyway Airlines to invalidate a legitimate first-class boarding pass based on an employee's personal assessment rather than actual system requirements. Karen's professional mask slipped momentarily. Dr. Peterson, I've already explained. You've offered justifications, not explanations. Dr. Peterson corrected. There's a significant difference. The confrontation was interrupted by Sarah Martinez's arrival on the aircraft. The gate agent quickly assessed the tense atmosphere and approached Karen. What's the situation? Sarah asked quietly. Routine seating adjustment that some passengers are unnecessarily concerned about, Karen replied. Nothing I can't handle. Sarah glanced around the cabin, noting the number of passengers with phones in hand and the barely concealed hostility directed at Karen. I'm getting alerts from customer service and social media. This doesn't look routine. It's being blown out of proportion, Karen insisted. A young girl with a promotional ticket was reassigned to economy, where she belongs. Some passengers are overreacting. Sarah's expression tightened. As a Hispanic woman who had faced her share of prejudice in customer service roles, she recognized the language of bias. Show me the passenger manifest and the seating change documentation. The timestamp changed again. Boarding 23 minutes until departure. In economy, Zoe was now surrounded by passengers who had seen James's video, which was circulating through the cabin via airdrop and text messages. A college student across the aisle offered her his window seat. A business traveler 2 rows ahead turned to express her outrage. A flight attendant, not Miguel, quietly asked if she needed anything. I'm fine, Zoe repeated, uncomfortable with the growing attention. Really, I just want to review my notes for tomorrow. The reality was more complex. She wasn't fine, she was humiliated, uncomfortable, and acutely aware that her experience wasn't unique. What made this situation unusual wasn't that it had happened, but that others were witnessing it and speaking up. That in itself was both comforting and terrifying. Her phone buzzed with a new message, this one from Dr. Peterson. I'm speaking right after you at tomorrow's conference. This is unacceptable treatment of a colleague. Gate agent now involved. Change coming. Zoe took a deep breath. The attention was overwhelming, but a small part of her, the part that had worked nights and weekends on her algorithm while her peers were at parties, felt a flicker of validation. Not for being discriminated against, but for being recognized as someone who belonged, who had earned her place. In first class, Sarah Martinez was reviewing the seating information on her tablet, her expression growing increasingly concerned. There's no system error recorded, she said to Karen, and no overbooking flag on this flight. In fact, we're at 62% capacity overall. It must not have been properly logged, Karen insisted. I made a judgment call based on my experience. A judgment call to downgrade a passenger with a valid first-class boarding pass while leaving 6 seats empty. Sarah's voice was low but intense. Karen, this is a serious violation of company policy. You weren't here, Karen replied defensively. The girl clearly didn't belong in first class. It was obvious she'd gotten the ticket through some diversity program. You know how these things work. They hand out premium tickets to hit quotas without considering whether the recipients understand the standards expected. Sarah's expression hardened. I need to see the passenger in question immediately. As they moved toward economy, Benjamin Taylor, the off-duty Skyway employee, approached them. Excuse me, he said, showing his employee badge discreetly. I'm Benjamin Taylor, Customer Experience Department. I think you should know that several passengers have already contacted corporate about this incident. Karen's confident demeanor finally faltered. Corporate, yes, Benjamin confirmed. And based on what I've witnessed, I'll be filing my own report as well. This is precisely the kind of interaction our new inclusion training was designed to prevent. The situation was spiraling beyond Karen's control. What had begun as a routine exercise of her authority, something she'd done countless times before without consequence, was now becoming a documented incident with potential professional repercussions. In the cockpit, Captain Blackwell received a message from ground control. Flight 2187, be advised of a possible customer service situation. Gate agent has boarded to address. Roger that, he replied, frowning. This was unusual. Any details I should be aware of? Negative, appears to be a seating dispute. Your departure time remains unchanged. Captain Blackwell made a note to follow up. After 22 years with Skyway, he knew that seating disputes were rarely just about seating. The timestamp changed again. Boarding 20 minutes until departure. In economy. Zoe looked up to see Karen approaching with Sarah Martinez and Miguel trailing behind. The surrounding passengers immediately tensed, several raising their phones to record. "Ms. Jackson," Sarah addressed her politely. "I'm Sarah Martinez, gate supervisor for Skyway. There seems to have been a misunderstanding with your seating assignment," Karen interjected. "As I was explaining to the passenger earlier, her promotional ticket was—" "Karen, please let me handle this." Sarah cut her off firmly. She turned back to Zoe. "May I see your boarding pass and conference credentials?" "Please." Zoe handed over the documents, including her slightly crumpled boarding pass with its clear first-class designation and her conference badge identifying her as a featured presenter at the National Aviation Innovation Conference. Sarah examined them carefully, then looked back at Zoe with a new expression, one of genuine respect tinged with concern. "Ms. Jackson, on behalf of Skyway Airlines, I want to sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Your first-class seat is absolutely valid, and we would like to escort you back to your assigned seat immediately." Around them, passengers nodded in approval. Some applauded quietly. The college student who had offered Zoe his window seat gave her a thumbs up. Karen's face had drained of color. "But the system error—" "There is no system error," Sarah stated flatly. "Miguel, please help Miss Jackson with her belongings." As Zoe gathered her damaged backpack and materials, the impact of what was happening began to sink in. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about visibility, accountability, and the power of being seen for who she truly was, not who others assumed she must be. The walk back to first class felt simultaneously triumphant and uncomfortable. Passengers watched as she passed, some offering encouraging smiles, others looking away awkwardly. Zoe kept her eyes forward, clutching her conference materials to her chest like armor. In first class, Dr. Peterson stood as Zoe approached. "Welcome back where you belong," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The elderly couple, Harold and Meredith Wilson, smiled warmly. James Rodriguez nodded in satisfaction, finally putting his phone away. As Miguel helped Zoe settle into her rightful seat, 3A, by the window, he whispered, "I'm truly sorry about what happened. It wasn't right, and I should have said something earlier." The simple acknowledgement meant more than he could know. Sarah Martinez addressed the first-class cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the confusion with seating assignments. We value all our passengers equally and strive to provide excellent service to everyone on board. We'll be departing shortly." The deliberate emphasis on equally wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Karen, who stood rigid with humiliation by the galley door. The timestamp changed one final time before departure. Boarding complete 18 minutes until departure. What had begun as an isolated act of discrimination had evolved into something more powerful, a moment of collective witness and response. The passengers of Flight 2187 had transformed from passive observers to active participants in ensuring justice was served. And for Zoe Jackson, the flight to Washington, D.C. had already become a journey of a different kind, one that would change her life and, though she didn't know it yet, an entire industry. Part 3, Community Mobilization begins. Does anyone else feel like we just witnessed something important? The question came from Harold Wilson, the elderly gentleman who had offered his seat to Zoe. He spoke quietly, but in the hushed atmosphere of the first-class cabin, his words carried. Several passengers nodded in agreement. The shared experience had created an unusual sense of community among strangers who, under normal circumstances, would have remained isolated in their pre-flight routines of emails, magazines, and noise-canceling headphones. "It's not over," James Rodriguez replied, keeping his voice low. "That flight attendant is still in charge of our service for the next 2 hours, and I'd bet my next paycheck she's not happy about being overruled. I served on the board of a civil rights organization for 20 years, Harold said, leaning forward. Documentation is everything in these situations. What you captured on video could be crucial. Peterson joined the conversation. I'm more concerned about the systemic issues this reveals. How many times has this happened without witnesses or intervention? How many people have been silenced or discouraged because they didn't have a plane full of allies? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable but impossible to dismiss. In the galley, Sarah Martinez was having a tense conversation with Karen. You placed the airline in a potentially actionable position, Sarah said firmly. That passenger is a VIP speaker at a major industry conference. Do you understand the liability you've created? Karen's expression was a mixture of defiance and dawning realization. How was I supposed to know who she was? She looks like a teenager in a hoodie. There was nothing about her that said first class. That's exactly the problem, Sarah said, her professional tone barely masking her personal anger. She is a teenage innovator presenting at the National Aviation Conference, and regardless of who she is or what she's wearing, we don't arbitrarily downgrade passengers with valid first-class tickets. Ever. Fine, Karen conceded stiffly. I'll provide standard service for the duration of the flight. You'll provide exemplary service, Sarah countered. I'm documenting this incident for review, but right now we need to get this plane off the ground without further issues. In the cockpit, Captain Blackwell was receiving concerning messages. The ground crew had alerted him to social media activity surrounding his flight, and the chief purser had requested an update on the cabin situation. This is the captain. He spoke into the intercom. Cabin crew, please report status for departure. Miguel approached the cockpit door. Sir, we had a seating issue that's been resolved. The gate supervisor is still on board, but will deplane momentarily. Is there anything I should be aware of? Captain Blackwell asked, his instincts telling him there was more to the story. Miguel hesitated. Sir, there was an incident with a young passenger being incorrectly downgraded from first class. It's been addressed, but passengers are upset and documenting everything. The young woman is apparently a speaker at the Aviation Innovation Conference tomorrow. Captain Blackwell's expression remained professional, but his eyes narrowed slightly. I'll speak with the supervisor before departure. In seat 3A, Zoe was finally able to spread out her presentation materials. The spacious first-class tray table easily accommodated her laptop and notes, and the empty seat beside her provided additional room for her textbooks. Peterson approached, introducing herself properly. I'm Dr. Amanda Peterson, Aerospace Engineering Department at MIT. I believe we're both presenting tomorrow. Yes, ma'am, Zoe replied, still feeling slightly overwhelmed. My session is at 10:30. Mine is at 11:15, Dr. Peterson said with a smile. I've actually read your abstract. Your approach to optimizing fuel consumption through atmospheric data integration is genuinely innovative. The predicted efficiency improvements are remarkable for someone at any age, let alone a high school student. Before Zoe could respond, a notification pinged on her phone. It was a direct message on Twitter. Just saw video of your treatment on #SkyWayShame as Aviation Week editor. I'd like to interview you at the conference. This story needs telling, and your algorithm deserves attention. Zoe stared at the message in shock. Someone had posted video of the incident online, and it was already reaching industry publications. Her carefully cultivated professional image, focused entirely on her technical contributions, was now at risk of being overshadowed by this incident. Around her, the first-class cabin was buzzing with quiet activity. James Rodriguez was showing Harold Wilson something on his phone. Meredith Wilson was speaking in hushed tones with another passenger. Dr. Peterson had returned to her seat but was watching Karen's movements with sharp attention. The sense of collective vigilance was palpable. Sarah Martinez was preparing to deplane when her company device chimed with an urgent message from corporate communications. Situation developing on social media reflight 2187. Possible discriminatory incident. Please confirm status and details ASAP. Video at 15K views and climbing. She quickly typed a response. Incident addressed on site. Passenger reinstated to correct seating. Full report to follow after departure. Monitoring situation. As Sarah moved toward the exit, she paused beside Zoe's seat. Ms. Jackson, I want to personally apologize again for your experience today. The airline will be following up with formal communication, but please know this incident does not reflect our values or policies. The official apology was welcome, but Zoe couldn't help noticing that it came only after her credentials had been verified, after she had proven her worthiness through her accomplishments, rather than being afforded basic dignity as a matter of course. Thank you, she replied simply. Karen watched the interaction from the galley, her expression unreadable. As senior flight attendant, she would normally have been the one addressing any customer service issues. Now she found herself sidelined, her authority diminished in front of an entire cabin of witnesses. The timestamp on the screens updated, departure 15 minutes. Captain Blackwell emerged from the cockpit, an unusual move before takeoff. His commanding presence was immediately felt as he approached Sarah Martinez. "I understand there was an incident," he said, his voice low, but carrying the natural authority of his position. "Yes, Captain," Sarah confirmed. "A passenger with a valid first-class ticket was inappropriately downgraded. The situation has been rectified, but passengers are concerned and documenting extensively." Captain Blackwell surveyed the cabin, noting the unusual level of passenger engagement and the obvious tension surrounding his senior flight attendant. "Which passenger?" he asked. Sarah nodded toward Zoe, and Captain Blackwell's expression changed subtly. Something protective flickered in his eyes. A recognition, perhaps, of what it meant to be young, black, and subjected to the burden of proving you belong in spaces where others are given the benefit of the doubt. "I'll address it," he said decisively. To Sarah's surprise, the captain moved directly to Zoe's seat. "Ms. Jackson," he said with quiet professionalism, "I'm Captain Blackwell. I understand there was an issue with your seating assignment earlier." Zoe looked up, surprised to be addressed directly by the captain. "Yes, sir, but it's been resolved." "Nevertheless," Captain Blackwell continued, "as the commanding officer of this aircraft, I want to personally assure you that you are a valued passenger, and we're grateful to have you on board. If you need anything during our flight, please don't hesitate to let our cabin crew know." The public acknowledgement from the highest authority on the aircraft sent a clear message to everyone, especially Karen. This wasn't a minor incident to be brushed aside. It was significant enough to warrant captain intervention. "Thank you, Captain," Zoe replied, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. As Captain Blackwell returned to the cockpit, he paused to speak briefly with Karen. Though passengers couldn't hear the exchange, the shift in Karen's demeanor afterward was unmistakable. Her face had paled, and her rigid posture suggested she'd received clear instructions about her expected behavior for the remainder of the flight. Sarah Martinez departed the aircraft, already composing her formal incident report on her tablet. Beyond the gate, her phone was lighting up with messages from supervisors in the corporate communications team. The hashtag Skyways Shame had expanded to hashtag Justice for Zoe and was gaining momentum across multiple platforms. Inside the cabin, passengers continued to connect over the shared experience. The elderly couple had struck up a conversation with James Rodriguez about his video documentation. Dr. Peterson was discussing the technical aspects of Zoe's upcoming presentation, offering mentorship and support. Even passengers who had initially remained uninvolved were now engaged, asking questions about what had happened and expressing their dismay. Miguel approached Zoe's seat with a pre-departure beverage tray. "Orange juice, water, or champagne," he offered, the same options Karen had presented to other first-class passengers. "Orange juice, please," Zoe replied. As Miguel placed the drink on her tray table, he spoke quietly. "I should have said something earlier. I saw what was happening and stayed silent. That's on me, and I'm sorry." The simple acknowledgement of his role, through action and inaction, was powerful in its honesty. Karen remained in the galley, her movements stiff as she prepared for departure service. The disruption to routine had thrown her off balance, forcing her to navigate unfamiliar territory where her authority had been publicly challenged and found wanting. The final timestamp appeared before takeoff. Departure imminent. The aircraft doors closed. The safety demonstration began, performed by Miguel rather than Karen. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Zoe looked out her window at Chicago falling away beneath her, the city where she'd grown up, where she'd developed her algorithm in a high school computer lab while classmates doubted her abilities, where she'd fought for every opportunity and recognition. Beside her lay her presentation materials, the culmination of 2 years of work that could potentially transform aviation efficiency. That had been her goal, to make a difference through her innovation, to be seen for her mind rather than judged by her appearance. Now, unexpectedly, she found herself at the center of a different kind of transformation. The passengers around her had witnessed discrimination and had chosen to stand against it. They had used their phones, their voices, and their positions to demand accountability. They had seen her, truly seen her, and decided she mattered. As Flight 2187 accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, something fundamental had already changed. What had begun as one woman's biased decision had catalyzed a moment of collective action that would continue to gain momentum long after the flight landed in Washington, D.C. And Zoe Jackson, still reviewing her presentation notes as the plane climbed through the clouds, had no idea that by this time tomorrow, she would be known not only for her brilliant algorithm, but also for being the catalyst of a movement that would transform an entire industry's approach to dignity, respect, and inclusion. The community mobilization had begun, first among the passengers of a single flight, then extending outward through social media, professional networks, and industry connections. By the time Flight 2187 reached cruising altitude, the ripple effects were already spreading far beyond the confines of the aircraft. Part 4, Strategic Patience and Escalating Tension. Did you see what she just did? The whispered question came from Meredith Wilson, who was watching Karen's interaction with another passenger. The flight had reached cruising altitude, and the first-class meal service had begun, revealing yet another layer of disparate treatment. Karen moved through the cabin with professional efficiency, but her warmth and attention varied dramatically depending on the passenger. For most, she offered detailed descriptions of the meal options and wine pairings, lingering to ensure their satisfaction. For Zoe, she placed the tray down without explanation and moved on immediately. The contrast is startling, Peterson agreed quietly, and completely deliberate. Watch how she's making eye contact with everyone except Zoe. James Rodriguez had been documenting these subtle differences, adding to the extensive record he'd already compiled. His background in aerospace systems made him naturally detail-oriented, and he approached this situation with the same methodical precision he applied to engineering problems. It's the pattern that matters, he explained to Harold Wilson. Individual actions can be explained away, but consistent patterns reveal intent. She's giving Zoe 2 seconds of attention on average, compared to 18-20 seconds for other passengers. It's subtle enough to deny, but obvious enough to humiliate. The timestamp on the screens now showed estimated arrival 1 hour 32 minutes. In the main cabin, Miguel was providing service with visible care, seemingly trying to compensate for his earlier inaction. He paused at each row, made eye contact with passengers, and responded thoughtfully to questions. The difference in approach between the two flight attendants was noticeable to everyone. Zoe remained focused on her presentation materials, deliberately avoiding engaging with Karen more than necessary. Years of navigating predominantly white academic spaces had taught her the value of strategic patience, choosing which battles to fight and which to observe, document, and address through proper channels. Her phone buzzed with another notification. The social media response to her situation was growing exponentially. Aviation blogs had picked up the story. Industry professionals were commenting. The original video had been viewed over 47,000 times and was climbing rapidly. "You're trending," Dr. Peterson informed her quietly. Hashtag Justice for Zoe just passed 25,000 mentions. How are you feeling about that? Zoe considered the question carefully. Conflicted, she admitted. I've always wanted my work to be what people notice, not this. I understand completely, Dr. Peterson replied. For what it's worth, your algorithm is remarkable. I reviewed it last week when the conference materials were distributed. The integration with existing flight management systems is particularly elegant. Most innovations at this scale require substantial retrofitting, but yours works within current parameters while significantly improving outcomes. The validation of her work, separate from the incident, meant more than Dr. Peterson could know. In the cockpit, Captain Blackwell was receiving concerning updates. The hashtag Skyway Shame had reached corporate headquarters, triggering crisis management protocols. Customer service lines were fielding calls about the incident from people who weren't even on the flight but had seen the video circulating online. Flight 2187, this is dispatch. Be advised that Director Harrison has requested an update on the situation in your cabin. Corporate communications is monitoring significant social media activity related to your flight. Captain Blackwell frowned. Linda Harrison was Skyway's customer service director, someone who wouldn't normally be involved with an in-flight issue unless it was escalating significantly. Roger that, dispatch. Cabin appears stable at this time. Will advise if situation changes. In truth, the cabin was far from normal. Though externally calm, the passengers had organized into an informal monitoring network. James Rodriguez continued documenting Karen's interactions, timing each passenger engagement with meticulous precision. Dr. Pedersen had connected with colleagues who would be attending the aviation conference, alerting them to the situation. Harold and Meredith Wilson engaged other passengers in quiet conversations about what they had witnessed. And in Skyway's corporate headquarters, Customer Service Director Linda Harrison was viewing the viral video with growing alarm. "Get me a direct line to that aircraft," she instructed her team, "and contact our social media response unit immediately. This is already a Category 3 incident and escalating." At the same time, Tyler Wilson, Skyway's social media manager, was tracking the explosive growth of the hashtags. What had begun with a few dozen mentions had exploded to over 72,000 in less than an hour. Industry influencers were sharing the video. Aviation journalists were asking for comments. Competitor airlines were subtly highlighting their own inclusivity policies. This is accelerating beyond standard response protocols, Tyler reported to his supervisor. The video shows clear discrimination against a minor who turns out to be a recognized innovator in our industry. Our silence is being interpreted as endorsement of the behavior. Back on Flight 2187, the tension continued to build in subtle ways. Karen maintained professional service standards, but found small ways to express her displeasure with the situation. Napkins placed carelessly, water glasses filled halfway, questions answered with minimal information. Each small slight was noted by the watchful passengers, added to the growing documentation of disparate treatment. The timestamp updated, estimated arrival 1 hour 15 minutes. Zoe continued reviewing her presentation, but the constant notifications on her phone made concentration difficult. Beyond the social media attention, she was now receiving messages from conference organizers expressing concern about her experience and offering additional support for her presentation tomorrow. "Ms. Jackson," Karen's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Please put your tray table up while I collect the meal service items." Other passengers' trays had not yet been collected. The request was premature and targeted. "I'm still working on my presentation," Zoe replied calmly. "The seatbelt sign isn't on, and according to FAR 121, 311 and cabin safety procedures, tray tables may remain down during normal cruise operations unless there's turbulence." The specific citation of federal aviation regulations wasn't accidental. Zoe had studied aviation regulations extensively as part of her research. This knowledge, like her algorithm, was part of her expertise, earned through dedicated study rather than granted by position or uniform. Karen's expression tightened at being corrected with her own industry's regulations. "Nevertheless, I need to collect the tray now." "Is there a specific operational reason?" Zoe asked, her tone polite but firm. Other passengers still have their trays down. The question was strategic, forcing Karen to either articulate a legitimate reason or acknowledge the disparate treatment. It was the kind of question that created a moment of accountability, one that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained away. Several nearby passengers were now openly watching the exchange. James Rodriguez had his phone positioned discreetly to record. "Fine," Karen conceded stiffly. "I'll return later." As she moved away, Dr. Peterson leaned across the aisle. "Well handled," she said quietly. "Strategic patience doesn't mean passive acceptance." The phrase resonated with Zoe. Throughout her academic career, she'd been advised by mentors, particularly other Black professionals in STEM fields, about the importance of choosing battles wisely. Strategic patience meant documenting patterns, gathering allies, and addressing issues through channels that couldn't be dismissed as emotional or confrontational. What was happening on this flight was strategic patience in action, not just by her, but by an entire community of witnesses who had chosen to see, document, and respond. In the galley, Miguel approached Karen cautiously. "The captain is asking for an update on cabin service." "Everything is proceeding normally," Karen replied tersely. "Despite the unnecessary complications." Miguel hesitated before speaking again. "Karen, I think we should be aware that passengers are documenting everything. Multiple people are recording interactions and timing your engagements with different passengers. Mr. Rodriguez in 4B has been logging every interaction down to the second." "Let them," Karen dismissed. "They're not seeing anything unprofessional." What she failed to recognize was that professionalism wasn't binary. The pattern of subtle differences in treatment, each individually deniable but collectively damning, was precisely what the passengers were capturing. The timestamp changed, Estimated arrival 58 minutes. At Skyway headquarters, the crisis was escalating. Linda Harrison had finally secured a direct communication channel to the aircraft and was preparing to intervene. Tyler Wilson reported that the hashtags had now been mentioned over 103,000 times, with the original video reaching nearly 250,000 views. The narrative is solidifying, he warned, and it's entirely against us. We're being portrayed as an airline that discriminates against young Black innovators. We need to demonstrate decisive action before this plane lands. On the ground in Washington, D.C., conference organizers were scrambling to respond. The National Aviation Innovation Conference was a prestigious industry event attended by executives, engineers, and federal regulators. A discrimination incident involving one of their featured speakers, especially a young innovator they had highlighted in promotional materials, threatened to overshadow the technical content of the event. We need to issue a statement supporting Ms. Jackson, the conference director decided, and arrange for additional security and support when she arrives. Her algorithm could transform industry efficiency standards. We can't let this incident diminish the impact of her work. Meanwhile, Federal Aviation Administration Director Rachel Harmon, who would be delivering the conference's keynote address, was reviewing the viral video with deepening concern. This is precisely the kind of barrier that discourages diverse talent from entering our industry, she noted to her staff. Prepare a statement emphasizing our zero-tolerance policy for discrimination in aviation spaces, and get me comprehensive information on this young woman's innovation. I want to highlight her work specifically in tomorrow's keynote. Back on Flight 2187, the cabin had settled into a tense equilibrium. Karen performed her duties with rigid professionalism, careful to avoid any obvious missteps that could be clearly documented. The passengers maintained their vigilance, sharing information through messages, whispers, and knowing glances. Zoe continued preparing her presentation, trying to focus on the technical challenges rather than the social dynamics swirling around her. Tomorrow she would stand before industry leaders and present her algorithm, an innovation that could significantly reduce fuel consumption and carbon emissions across commercial aviation. That was what mattered. That was why she was on this flight. Everything else was a distraction from her purpose and passion, or so she thought. What Zoe couldn't yet see, but what was becoming increasingly clear to everyone watching the situation unfold, was that her presence on this flight had catalyzed something important. By simply existing in a space where others believed she didn't belong, and by responding to discrimination with dignity and strategic patience, she had created an opportunity for witnessing and accountability that extended far beyond a single flight or seating assignment. The timestamp updated again, estimated arrival 45 minutes. The aircraft began its initial descent toward Washington, D.C., the change in engine tone signaling the approaching conclusion of the flight, but the story that had begun on board was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to gain momentum. As the captain announced their approach to Washington, phones throughout the cabin lit up with messages, updates, and notifications. The incident had transcended the confines of the aircraft, spreading through social media, professional networks, and industry channels. What had been witnessed by a few dozen passengers was now being seen by hundreds of thousands of viewers online. And in that digital witness, a different kind of accountability was taking shape, one that would ultimately transform not just a single flight experience, but an entire industry's approach to inclusivity, respect, and recognition of talent in all its forms. Part 5, Hidden Spear Tweet. Eyes revealed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Blackwell. We're beginning our initial descent into Washington, D.C. The local time is 11:42 a.m., and weather conditions are clear with excellent visibility. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. The announcement marked the transition into the final phase of the flight, but for many on board, the journey had become about something much larger than physical transportation. A subtle but profound shift had occurred among the passengers of Flight 2187. What had begun as individual concern had crystallized into collective witness and action. Karen moved through the cabin mechanically, checking seatbelts and tray tables with robotic efficiency. The warmth she displayed to select passengers was conspicuously absent as she approached Zoe's seat. Tray table up, seat in upright position, she instructed curtly. Zoe complied, carefully storing her presentation materials in her damaged backpack. As she did so, a conference document slipped her out. The program listing featured speakers at tomorrow's sessions. The glossy page fell open to her profile, which included her photo alongside an impressive biography highlighting her algorithm's potential impact on aviation efficiency. Peterson noticed it immediately. "You know," she said, loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "I've been reviewing Zoe's algorithmic approach to fuel optimization. It's genuinely groundbreaking, the kind of innovation our industry desperately needs." Karen paused, her attention caught by the unexpected comment. "Absolutely," James Rodriguez agreed, joining the conversation. "The potential applications for commercial aviation are substantial. We're talking billions in fuel savings across the industry." Harold Wilson leaned forward with interest. "Is that what you'll be presenting tomorrow, young lady?" Zoe nodded, slightly uncomfortable with the sudden attention to her work. "Yes, sir. My algorithm optimizes fuel consumption based on real-time atmospheric conditions and flight parameters. Initial simulations show potential efficiency improvements of up to 8.4% on standard routes." 8.4%. Another passenger, a business executive who had been quietly observing until now, let out a low whistle. That's enormous in aviation terms. Most efficiency improvements are measured in fractions of a percent. What's the carbon footprint reduction? Approximately 12.7% when applied to the current commercial fleet, Zoe replied, warming to her subject. The algorithm adapts to aircraft type, weather conditions, and loading factors to maximize efficiency without compromising safety margins. It can integrate with existing flight management systems as a software layer, requiring minimal hardware modifications. The technical discussion had drawn attention throughout the first-class cabin. Passengers who had been peripherally aware of the earlier incident were now listening with genuine interest. Karen remained frozen in the aisle, her expression shifting as the implications of Zoe's expertise became clear. This wasn't just any teenager she had humiliated and downgraded. This was a recognized innovator in her own industry. The National Young Innovators Program selected Zoe's project from over 3,000 submissions nationwide. Peterson added, "I believe you're the youngest finalist in the program's history, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Zoe confirmed. "Most finalists are college students or early career professionals. And tomorrow you're presenting to airline executives and FAA officials," James pointed out, "including representatives from Skyway Airlines. I imagine." The pointed comment wasn't lost on anyone, especially Karen, whose face had drained of color as the full context of her actions came into focus. "Do you know who this young woman is?" Dr. Peterson finally asked directly, looking straight at Karen. The question was simple but loaded with implication. Karen didn't respond immediately, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine discomfort. "This is Zoe Jackson," Dr. Peterson continued, her voice carrying throughout the quiet cabin. "Tomorrow she'll be presenting an algorithm that could save the aviation industry approximately $2.4 billion annually in fuel costs while significantly reducing carbon emissions. Her work is being evaluated by major airlines, including Skyway, for immediate implementation in their flight management systems." The revelation rippled through the cabin. Passengers who hadn't been directly involved in the earlier incident now understood its significance. This wasn't just about a seating assignment, it was about presumptions, prejudice, and the overlooking of exceptional talent based on appearance and age. "I wasn't aware of Mrs. Jackson's credentials," Karen finally managed, her voice strained. "That's precisely the point," Peterson replied evenly. "Her credentials shouldn't determine whether she receives equal treatment. Her humanity should be sufficient." The simple truth hung in the air, impossible to dismiss or explain away. Miguel had approached during the conversation, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as he realized the full context of the situation. "Ms. Jackson," he said quietly, "on behalf of the flight crew, I want to apologize again for—" "This isn't necessary," Karen interrupted sharply. "We can address any concerns through proper channels after landing." "Actually," James Rodriguez interjected, "I think transparency is exactly what's needed right now. The proper channels weren't working earlier when Ms. Jackson was incorrectly removed from her assigned seat." The confrontation was interrupted by the aircraft phone ringing. Miguel answered it, listening intently before turning to Karen. "It's Director Harrison from customer service," he said, unable to keep the gravity from his voice. She's requesting to speak with you immediately. Karen's professional composure finally cracked completely. Linda Harrison was 5 levels above her in the corporate hierarchy, someone who would only become involved in a cabin situation under extraordinary circumstances. "This is Karen Reynolds," she said into the phone, moving toward the galley for privacy. The passengers couldn't hear the full conversation, but Karen's responses were telling. "Yes, Director Harrison. No, I wasn't aware of. Yes, I understand the severity. The situation has been. No, I don't have an explanation for, of course, immediate corrective action." When she returned to the cabin, and Karen's demeanor had transformed entirely. The authority and confidence that had characterized her earlier interactions were gone, replaced by a rigid formality that barely masked her apprehension. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "Skyway Airlines wishes to extend our sincere apologies for any discomfort or inconvenience experienced during today's flight. Upon landing, Customer Service Director Harrison will be meeting the aircraft to address any concerns personally." The formal apology, clearly scripted by corporate, felt hollow compared to the genuine interactions that had characterized the passenger response throughout the flight. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Ground staff has notified us that we'll be met by Skyway representatives upon arrival. The timestamp updated arrival 25 minutes. On the ground, Skyway executives were scrambling to contain the rapidly expanding crisis. The original video had now been viewed over 430,000 times. Aviation industry publications were running breaking news alerts. Competitor airlines were subtly positioning their own inclusivity initiatives in response. Edward Thompson, Skyway's vice president of operations, had been pulled from a board meeting to address the situation. His team had prepared a preliminary statement, but he recognized that words alone would be insufficient. This required visible, decisive action that demonstrated the airline's values. "I'll meet the flight personally," he decided, "and I want our diversity team there as well. This young woman deserves more than a generic corporate apology." Meanwhile, the Federal Aviation Administration had taken notice. Director Rachel Harmon, already scheduled to attend tomorrow's conference, instructed her staff to gather information about the incident. "This is precisely the kind of barrier we've been working to eliminate," she noted. "Young innovators, particularly those from underrepresented groups, face enough challenges without having to defend their right to occupy space." As Flight 2187 began its final approach to Washington, D.C., the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed again. The technical discussion about Zoe's algorithm had created a new context for passengers to interact. Questions about aviation efficiency and environmental impact had replaced the tense silence of earlier confrontation. For Zoe, this shift was both welcome and bittersweet. Finally, the conversation was focused on her work rather than her identity. But it had taken an incident of public discrimination and the validation of other professionals to create that opening. "Will your algorithm work with existing flight management systems?" asked the business executive, who had been drawn into the technical discussion. "Yes, it's designed as an integration layer that works with current systems," Zoe explained, her passion for the subject evident. "The implementation costs are minimal compared to the efficiency gains." "Smart approach," James Rodriguez noted approvingly. "That's why it's garnering so much industry attention. Immediate benefits without massive infrastructure investments." Peterson smiled at Zoe's confident explanation. "You'll do wonderfully in your presentation tomorrow. The aviation industry needs fresh perspectives like yours." As the aircraft descended through clouds toward Washington, D.C., the interconnected nature of the journey became clear. What had begun as discrimination had evolved into recognition, not just of Zoe's professional contributions, but of the broader patterns that systematically excluded diverse talents from spaces where they could make the greatest impact. The wheels touched down precisely at 12:07 p.m. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, phones throughout the cabin lit up with messages, notifications, and updates. The story had continued to spread during their flight, gaining momentum across platforms and communities. "Look at this," James showed Harold Wilson his screen. "The video has over 640,000 views now, and the conference organizers have issued a statement supporting Zoe." Captain Blackwell's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C. Local time is 12:10 p.m. We've been advised that Skyway Airlines executives will be meeting our flight to address the situation that occurred during boarding. We ask that you remain seated momentarily after we reach the gate. Karen stood rigidly by the galley. Her earlier authority completely evaporated. Miguel moved through the cabin, providing standard arrival information, but with unusual gentleness when he reached Zoe's seat. "Ms. Jackson," he said quietly, "I want you to know that many of us in the industry admire innovators like you. What happened today doesn't represent who we want to be." The simple acknowledgement, personal rather than corporate, carried genuine meaning. As the aircraft reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers remained seated as requested. Through the windows, they could see an unusual welcoming committee on the jet bridge. Men and women in business attire with Skyway Airlines identification badges, looking serious and concerned. The forward door opened, and Edward Thompson, Skyway's vice president of operations, stepped into the aircraft, an extraordinary occurrence that underscored the severity with which corporate headquarters was treating the incident. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the cabin, "I'm Edward Thompson, Skyway's VP of operations. I want to personally apologize for the incident that occurred on this flight. Skyway Airlines is committed to creating an inclusive environment for all passengers, and what happened today falls far short of our values and standards." His gaze found Zoe in seat 3A. "Ms. Jackson, on behalf of the entire airline, I extend our sincerest apologies. We are taking immediate steps to address this situation and ensure it never happens again." The corporate response was necessary but insufficient. What had made the greatest impact wasn't this formal apology, but the collective action of passengers who had witnessed discrimination and chosen to respond, not with passive observation, but with documentation, intervention, and solidarity. As passengers finally began to gather their belongings and prepare to deplane, Dr. Peterson leaned across to Zoe one last time. "Remember," she said, "what happens after incidents like this defines organizations more than the incidents themselves. Watch closely what Skyway does next, not just what they say." The wisdom in that observation would become apparent in the hours and days ahead, as promises of change faced the test of implementation, and as Zoe Jackson stepped from the confines of an aircraft where her belonging had been questioned into a conference where her expertise would take center stage. The hidden expertise had been revealed, not just Zoe's technical brilliance, but the collective expertise of a community that recognized discrimination and mobilized to address it. Together, they had transformed a routine flight into a catalyst for change that would ultimately reach far beyond a single aircraft, airline, or industry. Part 6. Authority, Intervention, and Consequences. "Ms. Reynolds, I need to speak with you privately. Immediately." Edward Thompson's voice was professionally controlled, but the gravity in his tone was unmistakable as he addressed Karen away from passenger ears. Linda Harrison, Skyway's customer service director, stood beside him, her expression leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Meanwhile, passengers were deplaning, many pausing to offer words of encouragement to Zoe as they passed. The elderly couple, Harold and Meredith Wilson, stopped to shake her hand. James Rodriguez shared his business card and offered to attend her presentation tomorrow. Dr. Peterson promised to meet her for coffee before the conference sessions began. "You have allies in this industry," she assured Zoe quietly. "Don't let today's experience make you doubt that." The sense of community that had formed during the flight continued even as passengers dispersed into the terminal. Captain Blackwell emerged from the cockpit, approaching Zoe before she could leave. "Ms. Jackson, I want to personally apologize for your experience on our aircraft today. It does not reflect the values I've tried to uphold during my 22 years with this airline." "Thank you, Captain," Zoe replied, touched by his sincerity. "I'll be including a detailed account in my flight report," he continued, "and I've already spoken with our chief pilot about implementing additional training for cabin crews. What happened today wasn't just a customer service issue, it was a failure to recognize human dignity and worth." His professionalism and immediate focus on systemic solutions rather than just individual apologies reflected true leadership, addressing not only the specific incident but the underlying issues that had allowed it to occur. In the jet bridge at Airline, Edward Thompson was having a very different conversation with Karen Reynolds. "The videos are everywhere," he informed her, his voice low but intense. "Over 780,000 views across platforms and growing by the minute. Aviation journalists are asking for statements. The conference organizers have issued public support for Mrs. Jackson. The FAA director has personally requested information about the incident. Karen's face had lost all color. I was simply following what I believed to be protocol for. There is no protocol that justifies what happened. Linda Harrison interrupted sharply. You invalidated a legitimate first-class ticket based on personal assumptions about who belongs in premium cabins. You publicly humiliated a passenger. You damaged her property by forcefully removing her bag. And you created a discrimination incident that is now damaging our entire brand. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation, Edward Thompson stated. You will not continue to Washington. A relief crew member is already waiting to take your position for the return flight. The swift and public nature of the consequence was unprecedented, a reflection of both the severity of the incident and the airline's recognition that this situation demanded visible accountability rather than private reprimands. Suspended? Karen's voice cracked. After 15 years of service. 15 years of service makes this worse, not better, Linda Harrison replied. You should have known better. You should have done better. Miguel witnessed the exchange from the aircraft doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. The accountability he had been too hesitant to demand earlier was now being implemented from above. In the terminal, Zoe was surprised to find a welcoming committee of a different kind. Conference organizers had sent representatives to meet her, along with a security detail to ensure her comfort and privacy. Ms. Jackson, a woman in a conference blazer, approached. I'm Sophia Mendez, attorney for the National Aviation Innovation Conference. We've been monitoring the situation and want to ensure you have everything you need for a successful presentation tomorrow. The professional support was welcome, but Zoe couldn't help feeling that the attention was still focused on the incident rather than her work. She had spent 2 years developing her algorithm, countless nights refining her calculations and running simulations. Yet now she was becoming known for something entirely different, being discriminated against rather than for her technical contributions. I appreciate the support, she replied carefully. Mostly I just need time to finalize my presentation materials. Sophia nodded understanding. Of course, we've arranged for early check-in at your hotel, and the conference has upgraded your accommodations to a suite with a dedicated workspace. Director Harmon from the FAA has also requested to meet with you before tomorrow's session, if you are comfortable with that. The mention of Rachel Harmon, the Federal Aviation Administration's director and one of the most powerful women in the industry, gave Zoe pause. The FAA director wants to meet with me. Yes, she's particularly interested in your algorithm's potential impact on industry-wide efficiency standards. And I believe in ensuring that what happened today doesn't discourage you from continuing your important work. For the first time since the incident began, Zoe felt a genuine smile form. Finally, the recognition for her actual contributions rather than sympathy for her experience. Back in the jet bridge, the consequences were continuing to unfold. Regional Manager David Phillips had arrived, having been summoned from another terminal. His presence added another layer of authority to the intervention. The videos are clear, Karen, he stated flatly after reviewing the footage on his tablet. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a policy confusion. This was discriminatory treatment, plain and simple. I was trying to maintain standards, Karen insisted, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. What standards exactly? Linda Harrison challenged. The assumption that a young black woman couldn't legitimately belong in first class, that she must have gotten her ticket through some promotional program, rather than earning it like other passengers, that someone in a NASA hoodie doesn't deserve the same respect as someone in a business suit. The direct confrontation with the biased assumptions underlying her actions left Karen without response. Your choice today has damaged this young woman, our airline's reputation, and the aviation industry's ongoing efforts to become more inclusive. Edward Thompson concluded. Those are consequences you'll need to address through our formal review process. For now, please surrender your ID badge and proceed to ground transportation. You'll be flown back to Chicago as a passenger, not as crew. The decisive action reflected the severity of the situation, but also the airline's recognition that this incident demanded immediate, visible accountability rather than the typical behind-closed-doors handling of customer service issues. In the terminal, the story continued to spread. Passengers from Flight 2187 shared their experiences with waiting friends and colleagues. Social media updates multiplied. Aviation blogs published breaking coverage. The hashtag justice for Zoe had now been used over 180,000 times in the past 2 hours. Skyway's corporate communications team, led by Alexandra Burke, was working frantically to craft an appropriate response. "We need more than a standard apology statement," she insisted to her team. "This requires concrete action that demonstrates our values, not just claims them." Meanwhile, Zoe was being escorted through the terminal by conference representatives, her mind still trying to process the whirlwind of events. Her phone continued buzzing with notifications, messages from family, classmates, mentors, and increasingly industry professionals expressing support and interest in her work. One message in particular caught her attention, an email from her high school STEM teacher who had first encouraged her interest in aviation algorithms. "Zoe, I just saw what happened. Remember what I always told you, your brilliance isn't diminished by others' failure to recognize it. Tomorrow, show them exactly why you belong in that room." The simple encouragement from someone who had believed in her before any conference, invitations, or industry recognition brought tears to her eyes. That was what had been missing from the corporate apologies and professional support. Acknowledgement that her worth wasn't determined by others' recognition of it, but was inherent and unchanged regardless of how she was treated. At Skyway's gate, Miguel was preparing for the return flight to Chicago, now paired with Jason Roberts, the flight attendant who had been called in to replace Karen. The incident had affected him deeply, forcing him to confront his own complicity through inaction. "I should have said something earlier," he admitted to Jason as they prepared the galleys. "I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I was worried about challenging a senior crew member. My silence made me complicit." "The bystander effect is powerful," Jason acknowledged. "But this is how we learn and grow, by recognizing when we could have done better and committing to different actions next time." The conversation was interrupted by Captain Blackwell, who had just finished filing his detailed incident report. "Gentlemen," he addressed them professionally, "I want to be clear about my expectations for our return flight and all future services. Every passenger on our aircraft deserves equal respect and consideration, regardless of appearance, age, or background. If you ever witness a situation that contradicts this principle, I expect you to speak up, if not to the person involved, then to me directly. Is that understood?" "Yes, Captain," they responded in unison. This, too, was part of the authority intervention, not just formal consequences for Karen, but a clear resetting of expectations and values for everyone involved. In Washington, D.C.'s Reagan National Airport, Edward Thompson and Linda Harrison were now meeting with attorney Sophia Mendez, who represented both the conference and, potentially, Zoe's interests. "We want to make this right," Edward stated sincerely. "Beyond the immediate disciplinary action for the flight attendant involved, we're prepared to implement systematic changes to prevent similar incidents in the future." "That's commendable," Sophia replied professionally. "But Ms. Jackson deserves more than promises of future improvement. She experienced public humiliation and discrimination while using your service." "We understand," Linda Harrison acknowledged, "which is why we're prepared to offer comprehensive remedies, including formal apology, travel vouchers, and financial compensation for emotional distress." Sophia's expression remained neutral. "Those are standard customer service responses. This situation demands more substantial commitments. Miss Jackson isn't just any passenger. She's an innovator whose work could transform your industry, including your airline specifically. The message you send through your response will determine whether other young people of color see aviation as a field where they can contribute and be respected." The point landed with visible impact. This wasn't just about making amends to one passenger. It was about what the incident and response signaled to countless others watching from afar. "What do you propose?" Edward asked, recognizing the larger implications. "Three things," Sophia replied decisively. "First, a formal scholarship program in Ms. Jackson's name for young innovators from underrepresented groups interested in aviation careers. Second, comprehensive bias training for all customer-facing staff, developed in consultation with experts in the field. Third, a clear public commitment to implementing these changes with transparent metrics for measuring progress." The requests were substantial, but focused on systemic solutions rather than simply addressing the individual incident. They reflected an understanding that true accountability required structural change, not just personal consequences. We'll need to consult with our board, Edward began cautiously. Of course, Sophia agreed, but I should mention that Ms. Jackson will be speaking to several aviation journalists tomorrow after her presentation. The story she tells about Skyway's response will depend entirely on the actions you take between now and then. The implicit message was clear: this situation offered both risk and opportunity. The airline could either emerge as a leader in addressing industry-wide issues of inclusivity, or it could become a cautionary tale of what happens when discrimination goes inadequately addressed. Meanwhile, Zoe had arrived at her hotel, now upgraded to a spacious suite with a dedicated workspace for finalizing her presentation. The contrast between her cramped middle seat in economy, where Karen had attempted to relegate her, and the luxurious accommodations now provided couldn't have been more stark. But Zoe's focus remained on her work. Tomorrow, she would stand before industry leaders and present her algorithm, an innovation that could transform aviation efficiency while reducing environmental impact. That opportunity, which she had earned through 2 years of dedicated research and development, was what truly mattered. Her phone rang, her mother calling from Chicago, having seen the viral videos and news coverage. "Baby, are you okay?" The concern in her voice was evident. "I'm fine, Mom," Zoe assured her. Really, it was uncomfortable, but the other passengers stood up for me, and now the airline is scrambling to make things right. "I'm so proud of how you handled it," her mother said, emotion evident in her voice. "But I'm angry that you had to handle it at all. You've worked so hard for this opportunity." "And I still have it," Zoe reminded her. "Tomorrow I present my algorithm to the entire industry. That's what matters, not what one flight attendant thought of me." The wisdom and perspective in her response reflected the resilience that had brought her to this point, the same determination that had carried her through advanced calculus classes where she was the only Black student, through coding competitions where judges expressed surprise at her abilities, through every space where her belonging had been questioned rather than assumed. Across town, in Skyway's regional offices, the consequences continued to unfold. Karen Reynolds sat in a sterile conference room, accompanied by a union representative, as human resources officials detailed the formal investigation process that would determine her long-term employment status. "The preliminary evidence is extremely concerning," the HR director stated professionally. "Multiple passenger statements corroborate discriminatory treatment. Video documentation shows clear pattern of disparate service. Your own statements suggest biased assumptions about the passenger's legitimacy in first class." Karen's earlier defiance had given way to a dawning recognition of the seriousness of her situation. "I've served this airline for 15 years with an exemplary record," she said quietly. "And yet," the HR director replied, "in a single flight, you managed to violate our non-discrimination policies, create a viral PR crisis, and potentially expose the airline to legal liability. Those 15 years don't excuse what happened today. They make it more concerning that someone with your experience would demonstrate such poor judgment." The message was unambiguous. Longevity did not equate to immunity. Accountability applied regardless of tenure or past performance. By evening, the incident had evolved into a full-blown case study in crisis management, corporate response, and industry accountability. Skyway's board of directors had convened an emergency meeting to address the situation. The FAA had issued a statement reaffirming its commitment to inclusive practices across aviation. Industry publications were publishing analyses of the broader implications for corporate culture and customer service. And in her hotel suite, Zoe Jackson put the final touches on her presentation, focusing on the innovation that had brought her to Washington in the first place. Tomorrow she would step onto the conference stage, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as the brilliant young mind she had always been, finally being recognized for her contributions rather than questioned about her belonging. The authority intervention had been swift and visible, corporate executives appearing in person, formal suspensions implemented, investigations launched, and systemic solutions proposed. But the most powerful intervention had come earlier, from ordinary passengers who had witnessed injustice and chosen to document, challenge, and address it through their collective action. That was the lesson that would ultimately transform an industry. Authority didn't reside only with those in uniforms or executive suites, but with anyone willing to witness injustice and speak against it. Real accountability began not with corporate policies, but with human recognition of shared dignity and worth. As Washington, D.C.'s evening skyline glowed outside her hotel window, Zoe reviewed her algorithm one final time, the elegant mathematics that could optimize fuel consumption while reducing environmental impact. Tomorrow belonged to this work, to her brilliant mind and dedicated research. Today's incident would become a footnote in her career rather than its defining moment. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Part 7, Immediate Aftermath and Flight Experience. I believe you have a seat in 3A, Miss Jackson. Captain Blackwell's words carried a weight beyond their simple meaning as he personally escorted Zoe back to her first-class seat following Karen's removal from the aircraft. The gesture, deliberate in public, represented more than just a correction of a seating error. It was an acknowledgement of her rightful place, both physically on the aircraft and symbolically within the aviation community. The remaining hour of Flight 2187 unfolded with a markedly different atmosphere. Miguel provided attentive, respectful service to all passengers, but took special care with Zoe, not out of pity or overcompensation, but with the professional courtesy that should have been present from the beginning. "May I offer you anything else before we begin our descent?" he asked, stopping beside her seat. "Just some water, please," Zoe replied, looking up from her presentation notes. Miguel returned promptly with a glass of ice water, placing it carefully on her tray table alongside a small plate of premium chocolates, the same offered to other first-class passengers. "I wanted to say," he began hesitantly, "what happened earlier. It made me realize how often I've stayed silent when I should have spoken up. That won't happen again." The simple acknowledgement, personal rather than corporate, carried genuine weight. This wasn't a scripted apology, but a human recognition of complicity and commitment to change. Across the aisle, Dr. Peterson was engaged in a thoughtful discussion with Zoe about her algorithm's potential applications. "The integration with existing flight management systems is particularly elegant," she noted. "Most innovations at this scale require substantial retrofitting, but yours works within current parameters while significantly improving outcomes." "That was intentional," Zoe explained, warming to the technical discussion. "The most brilliant solution won't be implemented if it's too disruptive or expensive. I wanted to create something airlines could adopt immediately, with minimal barriers to entry." The conversation attracted interest from other passengers, particularly James Rodriguez, whose background in aerospace systems gave him natural appreciation for Zoe's approach. "The environmental implications are substantial," he observed. "An 8.4% efficiency improvement across the commercial fleet would reduce carbon emissions by millions of tons annually. 12.7% in optimal conditions," Zoe corrected politely. "The algorithm adapts to real-time atmospheric data and flight parameters, allowing for dynamic optimization beyond what static systems can achieve." The technical discussion continued throughout the descent, transforming the cabin atmosphere from tension to engagement. Other passengers listened with interest, asking thoughtful questions about implementation timelines, cost factors, and industry adoption potential. This was the conversation Zoe had prepared for, focused on her innovation rather than her identity, recognizing her expertise rather than questioning her belonging. The shift was subtle but profound. She was no longer the young black girl who had been inappropriately downgraded, but the brilliant innovator whose algorithm could transform aviation efficiency. In the cockpit, Captain Blackwell was receiving concerning messages from ground control. The incident had gone viral during their flight, triggering corporate response protocols and drawing media attention. "Be advised," came the message from dispatch. "Customer Service Director Harrison and VP of Operations Thompson will meet the aircraft upon arrival. Situation has escalated to Category 2 corporate incident. Social media exposure exceeding 850,000 views." The classification was telling. Category 2 represented significant reputation risk requiring executive intervention. Only safety incidents received higher priority in Skyway's crisis management hierarchy. "Copy that," Captain Blackwell responded. "Please inform leadership that I'll be filing a comprehensive incident report upon arrival." As the aircraft began its final approach to Washington, D.C., Karen remained isolated in the galley, her earlier authority completely diminished. The corporate intervention had been swift and unambiguous, a reflection of both the severity of her actions and the potential damage to the airline's reputation. Miguel handled the arrival announcements, his voice carrying a warmth and professionalism that had been notably absent from Karen's earlier interactions. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, the captain has advised that Skyway representatives will be meeting our flight. We ask that you remain seated momentarily after arrival to allow them to board. The timestamp updated one final time. Arrival landing. The aircraft touched down smoothly on Washington's runway, taxiing toward the gate where an unusual welcoming committee awaited. Through the windows, passengers could see a group of individuals in corporate attire, the visible manifestation of Skyway's recognition that this situation demanded executive presence rather than standard customer service response. As the aircraft reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers remained seated as requested. The forward door opened, and Edward Thompson, Skyway's Vice President of Operations, stepped aboard, an extraordinary occurrence that underscored the seriousness with which corporate headquarters was treating the incident. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the cabin, "I'm Edward Thompson, Skyway's VP of Operations. I want to personally apologize for the incident that occurred on this flight. Skyway Airlines is committed to creating an inclusive environment for all passengers, and what happened today falls far short of our values and standards." His gaze found Zoe in seat 3A. "Ms. Jackson, on behalf of the entire airline, I extend our sincerest apologies. We are taking immediate steps to address this situation and ensure it never happens again." The corporate response was necessary but insufficient compared to the authentic community that had formed among the passengers during the flight. What had made the greatest impact wasn't this formal apology, but the collective action of witnesses who had chosen to respond to discrimination with documentation, intervention, and solidarity. As passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to deplane, Dr. Peterson leaned across to Zoe one final time. "Remember," she said, "what happens after incidents like this defines organizations more than the incidents themselves. Watch closely what Skyway does next, not just what they say." The wisdom in that observation would become apparent in the hours and days ahead, as promises of change faced the test of implementation, and as Zoe Jackson prepared to step onto the conference stage where her expertise would finally take center stage. In the jet bridge, the consequences for Karen Reynolds were becoming clear. Linda Harrison, Skyway's customer service director, delivered the news directly and without equivocation. "You are suspended effective immediately, pending formal investigation," she stated. "Your return flight duties have been reassigned, and you'll be traveling back to Chicago as a passenger, not as crew." The swift and public nature of the consequence was unprecedented, a reflection of both the severity of the incident and the airline's recognition that this situation demanded visible accountability rather than private reprimands. As passengers exited the aircraft, many paused to offer words of encouragement to Zoe. The elderly couple, Harold and Meredith Wilson, stopped to shake her hand and wish her success at tomorrow's presentation. James Rodriguez provided his business card and offered to attend her session to show support. Several other passengers expressed similar intentions. "We'll be there in the front row," Harold Wilson assured her. "Not because of what happened today, but because your work deserves recognition." The sense of community that had formed during the flight continued even as the physical journey concluded, a testament to the bonds created through collective witness and action. In the terminal, Zoe was surprised to find conference representatives waiting to escort her to her hotel. The National Aviation Innovation Conference had been alerted to the situation and had mobilized support immediately. "Ms. Jackson," a woman in a conference blazer approached. "I'm Sophia Mendez, attorney for the conference. We've been monitoring the situation and want to ensure you have everything you need for a successful presentation tomorrow." The professional support was welcome, but Zoe couldn't help feeling that the attention remained focused on the incident rather than her work. She had spent 2 years developing her algorithm, countless nights refining calculations and running simulations. Yet now she was becoming known for something entirely different, being discriminated against rather than for her technical contributions. "I appreciate the support," she replied carefully. "Mostly I just need time to finalize my presentation materials." Sophia nodded understanding. "Of course, we've arranged for early check-in at your hotel, and the conference has upgraded your accommodations to a suite with a dedicated workspace. Director Harmon from the FAA has also requested to meet with you before tomorrow's session, if you're comfortable with that." The mention of Rachel Harmon, the Federal Aviation Administration's director and one of the most powerful women in the industry, gave Zoe pause. "The FAA director wants to meet with me." "Yes, she's particularly interested in your algorithm's potential impact on industry-wide efficiency standards. and I believe in ensuring that what happened today doesn't discourage you from continuing your important work." For the first time since the incident began, Zoe felt a genuine smile form. Finally, under recognition for her actual contributions rather than sympathy for her experience. The immediate aftermath continued to unfold across multiple dimensions. In Skyway's corporate offices, crisis management teams were working to craft appropriate responses for media, employees, and industry partners. Alexandra Burke, Skyway's chief communications officer, rejected the first 3 drafts of the corporate statement, insisting on language that acknowledged specific failures rather than hiding behind generic corporate speak. "This isn't about protecting our image," she told her team firmly. "It's about demonstrating our values through concrete actions. Empty apologies will only make this worse." On social media, the story continued to spread exponentially. The original video had reached over 1 million views, with aviation journalists and industry influencers amplifying its reach. Comment sections filled with similar stories from passengers who had experienced or witnessed discrimination on commercial flights, revealing a pattern that extended far beyond a single incident. And in her hotel suite, Zoe Jackson focused on finalizing her presentation, determined that tomorrow's discussion would center on her innovation rather than today's discrimination. Her algorithm, the product of 2 years dedicated research and development, deserved to be the headline, not the incident on the flight. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Marmot Peterson. "Just checking that you're settled. I meant what I said about your algorithm. It's brilliant work that deserves industry attention. Coffee before the sessions tomorrow. Would love to discuss potential collaboration on implementation strategies." The simple professional acknowledgement, focused on her work rather than the incident, meant more than all the corporate apologies and formal statements. This was what she had worked for: recognition of her mind, her research, her contributions. As evening fell over Washington, D.C., the immediate aftermath began to transition into longer-term impact. Skyway Airlines announced the formation of a task force to review and strengthen inclusivity practices across customer service operations. The National Aviation Innovation Conference issued a formal statement supporting Zoe and emphasizing the importance of diverse perspectives in the industry. Industry publications prepared features on both the incident and Zoe's groundbreaking algorithm. What had begun as discrimination on a single flight had catalyzed conversations about representation, belonging, and accountability across an entire industry. The immediate aftermath had revealed both institutional failures and community strengths, the capacity for systems to perpetuate bias and the power of collective witness to challenge it. And for Zoe Jackson, the events of the day had reinforced what she had always known, that her worth wasn't determined by others' recognition of it, but was inherent and unchanged regardless of how she was treated. Tomorrow, she would stand on the conference stage not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as the brilliant young mind she had always been, finally being recognized for her contributions rather than questioned about her belonging. The flight experience that had begun with discrimination had been transformed through collective action into something powerful and affirming. The journey wasn't just from Chicago to Washington, D.C., but from exclusion to recognition, from questioning to validation, and that journey was far from over. Part 8, Arrival and Immediate Consequences. "Ms. Jackson, there are journalists waiting in the terminal. Would you like security escort to your transportation?" Sophia Mendez's question caught Zoe off guard as they stepped into the jet bridge. The attorney's tablet displayed live news updates showing that the incident had gone fully viral during their flight. Over 1.2 million views and climbing rapidly, with mainstream media now picking up the story alongside aviation publications. "Journalists," Zoe echoed, momentarily overwhelmed. The technical presentation she had been mentally rehearsing suddenly seemed far removed from this new reality. "You don't have to speak with them," Sophia assured her. "The conference has arranged private transportation and can provide security if needed." Zoe considered the options carefully. Throughout her academic career, she'd been advised to keep her head down and let her work speak for itself. Causing scenes or drawing attention had never been an option for a young Black girl in predominantly white STEM spaces. But something had shifted during Flight 2187. The passengers who had witnessed her treatment and chosen to document and challenge it had demonstrated a different possibility, one where speaking truth didn't diminish professional credibility but reinforced it. "I'll speak briefly," she decided, "but I want to focus on my presentation tomorrow, not just what happened on the flight." Sophia nodded approvingly. That's a perfect approach. Direct, but purposeful. As they entered the terminal, the immediate consequences of the incident became visibly apparent. A small group of reporters had gathered near the gate, alongside photographers with long lenses. Skyway representatives formed a protective semicircle, attempting to manage the situation while maintaining professional composure. Edward Thompson, the Skyway VP who had boarded the aircraft to apologize, was now addressing media questions with careful precision. Yes, the incident occurred as depicted in the videos, he confirmed. No, it does not reflect Skyway's values or policies. Yes, immediate disciplinary action has been taken regarding the employee involved. No, I cannot discuss specific personnel matters further at this time. And when he spotted Zoe emerging from the jet bridge, he immediately moved toward her, with security personnel clearing a respectful path. Ms. Jackson, he said quietly, I want to reiterate my sincere apologies for your experience today. Our team has arranged for upgraded accommodations at your hotel and complimentary private transportation to the conference tomorrow. Additionally, I'd like to personally invite you to meet with our technology implementation team while you're in Washington. Your algorithm has significant potential applications for our fleet. The professional acknowledgement of her work, separate from the incident, reflected a nuanced understanding that she was more than this single experience. She was an innovator whose contributions mattered to the industry. Thank you, Zoe replied. I'd be interested in discussing implementation possibilities after my presentation tomorrow. Several journalists had noticed their conversation and were moving closer, cameras and recorders ready. Sophia stepped smoothly into her role as intermediary. Ms. Jackson will take 2 questions, she announced firmly. She needs to prepare for her technical presentation at tomorrow's conference. A reporter from Aviation Weekly spoke first. Ms. Jackson, how do you feel about the airline's response to the discrimination you experienced? Zoe chose her words carefully, aware that her response would likely appear in industry publications. I appreciate the swift accountability shown by Skyway's leadership today. What matters most is that this incident leads to meaningful changes that prevent similar situations for future passengers. The second question came from a national news outlet. You're presenting a groundbreaking algorithm tomorrow that could transform aviation efficiency. Has today's experience affected your perspective on the industry you're working to improve? The question created the perfect opening to redirect attention to her work rather than the incident. The aviation industry, like many technical fields, benefits from diverse perspectives and innovative approaches, Zoe replied with growing confidence. My algorithm optimizes fuel consumption while reducing carbon emissions by 12.7% in standard flight operations. The feedback I've received from industry professionals, including many on today's flight, reinforces my belief that good ideas are ultimately recognized and valued on their merits. The response was perfect, acknowledging the insight without allowing it to overshadow her professional contributions. Sophia nodded approval as she guided Zoe toward the waiting transportation. Other passengers from Flight 2187 were dispersing throughout the terminal, many still discussing what they had witnessed. The elderly couple, Harold and Meredith Wilson, stopped to speak with reporters, providing their perspective as witnesses. James Rodriguez shared his video documentation with several journalists, ensuring the record was clear and accurate. What struck me most wasn't just the discriminatory treatment, he explained to an Aviation Today reporter, but how precisely documented it was by multiple passengers. This wasn't one person's word against another. It was a pattern captured from multiple angles. Dr. Peterson had arranged to meet FAA Director Rachel Harmon, who had been alerted to the situation and was preparing to address it in her keynote speech tomorrow. The incident demonstrates exactly why we need diverse voices in aviation. Dr. Peterson explained to Director Harmon, this young woman's algorithm could save the industry billions while significantly reducing environmental impact. Yet she was nearly prevented from presenting it because someone decided she didn't look like she belonged in first class. I've reviewed her proposal, Director Harmon replied. It's impressive work, exactly the kind of innovation we should be nurturing rather than excluding. I'll be referencing both her technical contribution and today's incident in tomorrow's keynote. Meanwhile, Karen Reynolds was experiencing immediate consequences of a different kind. Skyway's HR department had arranged for her return to Chicago, not as crew but as a passenger on a different airline. Her company credentials and uniform items had been collected. Her employment status was officially suspended pending investigation, but the public nature of the incident and the clear video evidence made the likely outcome apparent to everyone involved. The investigation will follow standard protocols, the HR representative explained professionally. But given the severity of the documented violations and the public nature of the incident, you should be prepared for the possibility of termination. Karen sat stunned in the private conference room where this information was being delivered. The reality of how completely one flight, one interaction, could derail a 15-year career was finally sinking in. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked quietly. "Any way to address this situation?" "You'll have the opportunity to provide a formal statement during the investigation," the HR representative replied, "but I would strongly advise consulting with union representation before doing so. The evidence in this case is substantial." The measured professional tone couldn't disguise the gravity of the situation. What had begun as a routine exercise of authority, something Karen had done countless times before without consequence, had escalated into a career-defining crisis that would likely end with termination and potential industry blacklisting. In the conference headquarters, organizers were scrambling to adjust tomorrow's program. Zoe's presentation had originally been scheduled in a medium-sized breakout room, appropriate for a new presenter. Now, given the attention surrounding both her algorithm and the discrimination incident, they moved her to the main auditorium immediately following Director Harmon's keynote address. "We need to accommodate additional attendees," the program director explained. "Based on social media response, attendance for her session could triple our original projections." The immediate consequences continued to unfold across multiple dimensions. Skyway Airlines issued a formal statement acknowledging the incident, announcing immediate review of customer service protocols, and committing to substantial investments in inclusivity training and accountability measures. The airline's stock price dipped slightly as investors assessed potential reputation damage and litigation risk. Aviation industry publications ran breaking news stories highlighting both the discrimination incident and Zoe's innovative algorithm. Professional associations issued statements condemning bias in aviation spaces and emphasizing the importance of diverse perspectives in technical innovation. Social media engagement continued to explode, with the original video exceeding 1.5 million views by early evening. The hashtags #JusticeForZoe and #Skyway shame trended nationally, drawing attention from celebrities, politicians, and industry leaders. At her hotel, Zoe finally had a moment to process the whirlwind of events. The conference had upgraded her accommodations to a luxury suite with a dedicated workspace, perfect for finalizing her presentation. Room service had been arranged for dinner, so she wouldn't need to navigate public spaces where she might be recognized or approached. She called her mother, who had been anxiously monitoring the situation from Chicago. "Are you really okay, baby?" her mother asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm fine, Mom," Zoe assured her. "It was uncomfortable, but the other passengers stood up for me, and now the airline is falling all over itself to make things right." "I'm so proud of how you handled it," her mother said, emotion evident in her voice. "But I'm angry that you had to handle it at all. You've worked so hard for this opportunity." "And I still have it," Zoe reminded her. "Tomorrow I present my algorithm to the entire industry. That's what matters, not what one flight attendant thought of me." The wisdom and perspective in her response reflected the resilience that had brought her to this point. The same determination that had carried her through advanced calculus classes where she was the only Black student, through coding competitions where judges expressed surprise at her abilities, through every space where her belonging had been questioned rather than assumed. After finishing the call with her mother, Zoe found another message waiting, this one from Captain Blackwell, who had obtained her contact information through conference organizers. "Ms. Jackson, I wanted to follow up personally regarding today's incident. I've filed a comprehensive report highlighting both the discriminatory treatment you experienced and the need for systematic changes in our training and accountability procedures. As someone who has often been the only one in the room throughout my aviation career, I recognize the courage and composure you demonstrated today. If there's anything I can do to support your continued work in our industry, please don't hesitate to ask. Your innovation is precisely what aviation needs." The personal message, professional yet genuinely supportive, reflected true allyship rather than performative concern. Captain Blackwell had used his position of authority to document the incident thoroughly and advocate for substantive change, not just offer empty sympathy. The immediate consequences of the incident continued to ripple outward. Miguel, the flight attendant, who had initially failed to intervene but later acknowledged his complicity, had submitted his own statement to Skyway's HR department, detailing both what he had witnessed and his own failure to take appropriate action in the moment. "I recognized that something was wrong," he wrote, "but allowed concerns about challenging a senior colleague to override my responsibility to ensure equal treatment of all passengers. This represents a failure of both personal and professional integrity that I am committed to addressing through my future actions." The honest self-assessment, acknowledging complicity without making excuses, demonstrated the kind of reflection that could potentially transform not just individual behavior, but institutional culture. By evening, Skyway Airlines had announced the formation of a task force to review and strengthen inclusivity practices across customer service operations. Edward Thompson, who had personally intervened on the aircraft, would chair the initiative, with outside experts in diversity and inclusion invited to participate alongside frontline employees. "This isn't about public relations damage control," he stated in the announcement. "It's about ensuring our actions consistently reflect our stated values." What happened today revealed a gap between those values and our operational reality, a gap we are committed to closing through concrete, measurable actions. The National Aviation Innovation Conference issued a formal statement supporting Zoe and emphasizing the importance of diverse perspectives in the industry. The brilliant young innovator who experienced discrimination today represents exactly the kind of fresh thinking our industry needs to address its most pressing challenges. Her algorithm offers potential solutions to both economic and environmental concerns that affect aviation globally. As night fell over Washington, D.C., Zoe finalized her presentation, determined that tomorrow's discussion would center on her innovation rather than today's discrimination. Her algorithm, the product of 2 years dedicated research and development, deserved to be the headline, not the incident on the flight. Tomorrow she would step onto the conference stage not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as the brilliant young mind she had always been, finally being recognized for her contributions rather than questioned about her belonging. The immediate consequences had been swift and substantial: corporate interventions, media coverage, industry statements, and widespread social media response. But the true impact would be measured not in today's reactions, but in tomorrow's actions. Not in corporate statements, but in substantive changes. Not in momentary attention, but in lasting transformation. That was the test that still lay ahead for Skyway Airlines, for the aviation industry, and for a society still struggling to recognize talent and dignity regardless of appearance, age, or background. Part 9, the conference presentation. Algorithm E12, Optimizing Fuel Efficiency Through Adaptive Flight Parameters. The title slide appeared on the massive screen behind Zoe as she stood at the podium, facing an auditorium filled far beyond its intended capacity. Where conference organizers had originally expected perhaps 70 attendees for her presentation, nearly 400 industry professionals now filled every seat, lined the walls, and crowded the entrance. FAA Director Rachel Harmon had just concluded her keynote address, which had included a pointed reference to both Zoe's innovative algorithm and the discrimination she had experienced. "The greatest threat to aviation's future isn't technological limitations, but our own failure to recognize and nurture brilliance regardless of its source," Director Harmon had stated firmly. Yesterday, a young innovator whose work could transform our industry's efficiency was told she didn't belong in a first-class seat. Today, she stands before us to present an algorithm that could save billions while reducing our environmental impact. The contrast between that rejection and her remarkable contribution offers a powerful lesson about what we lose when we allow bias to blind us to human potential. Now Zoe stood alone on the stage, her presentation materials meticulously prepared despite the previous day's turmoil. She had deliberately chosen professional attire, a tailored navy blazer over a simple white blouse and dark slacks, but kept her braided hair in its natural style, refusing to conform to every expectation of how an aviation expert should appear. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the unexpectedly large audience. Today, I'll be presenting an algorithmic approach to fuel efficiency optimization that integrates real-time atmospheric data with flight parameters to achieve substantial consumption reductions without compromising safety or performance standards. In the front row, Dr. Peterson nodded encouragingly. They had met for coffee earlier that morning, discussing both technical aspects of the presentation and strategies for managing the heightened attention surrounding her appearance. Focus on your work, Dr. Peterson had advised. That's what matters, and that's what you've earned the right to present. Everything else is background noise. As Zoe moved into the technical core of her presentation, explaining the mathematical models underlying her algorithm, the simulation methodologies used to test it, and the efficiency improvements documented across different aircraft types and route structures, the audience's attention remained fixed on her expertise rather than yesterday's incident. The key innovation lies in the adaptive response patterns, she explained, highlighting a complex graph showing efficiency curves across different altitude and weather conditions. Traditional flight management systems follow predetermined efficiency parameters that remain static regardless of changing conditions. This algorithm continuously recalibrates based on real-time atmospheric data, creating dynamic optimization that conventional approaches cannot achieve. She clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed computational model. The system utilizes a neural network framework with 3 hidden layers processing multiple data streams, simultaneously atmospheric density, temperature gradients, wind patterns, aircraft weight distribution, and engine performance metrics. This creates a multi-dimensional optimization matrix that updates every 2.7 seconds during flight. In the third row, James Rodriguez listened with growing professional appreciation. As an aerospace systems engineer with Meridian Technologies, he recognized the elegant simplicity of Zoe's solution, a hallmark of truly groundbreaking innovation. The integration with existing flight management systems is particularly noteworthy, Zoe continued, advancing to a slide showing implementation diagrams. Rather than requiring expensive hardware upgrades or retrofitting, the algorithm functions as a software layer that works with current systems while substantially improving their performance. Implementation requires minimal downtime and can be deployed across an airline's fleet progressively without service disruption. Throughout the audience, industry professionals who had initially attended out of curiosity or solidarity were now engaged with genuine technical interest. Skyway executives, including Edward Thompson and technology implementation specialists, took detailed notes on potential applications for their fleet. Initial simulations demonstrate efficiency improvements of 8.4% in standard conditions, with peaks of 7% under optimal parameters, Zoe noted, highlighting the environmental and economic implications. Across the commercial aviation fleet, this represents potential annual fuel savings of approximately $2.4 billion and carbon emission reductions of over 7.3 million metric tons. She clicked to a slide showing implementation scenarios across different aircraft types. The algorithm shows consistent performance across all major commercial aircraft, with particularly strong results in the Airbus A320neo and Boeing 787 families due to their advanced sensor arrays. However, even older aircraft see substantial improvements with minimal adaptation requirements. The numbers were compelling by any standard, the kind of innovation that could transform industry practices while addressing both economic and environmental concerns. This was what Zoe had worked toward for 2 years, creating an elegant solution to a complex problem that offered immediate, measurable benefits with minimal implementation barriers. As she concluded the technical portion of her presentation and opened the floor for questions, hands shot up throughout the auditorium. Unlike the previous day's focus on the discrimination incident, these questions centered entirely on her algorithm, implementation timelines, compatibility with specific aircraft types, regulatory approval processes, and potential international applications. The algorithm has been tested with flight management systems from all major manufacturers, Zoe explained in response to a technical question from a Boeing engineer. The API integration is standardized to ensure cross-platform compatibility regardless of existing avionics configuration. We've validated performance across Collins Aerospace, Honeywell, and Thales systems with consistent results. Her answers were confident, precise, and demonstrated deep knowledge not just of her specific innovation, but of the broader aviation systems in which it would operate. This wasn't a student project or theoretical exercise, but a thoroughly developed solution ready for real-world implementation. After fielding nearly a dozen technical questions, Zoe noticed Director Harmon signaling from the side of the stage that time was running short. She prepared to conclude the session, but first she addressed something that had been implicit throughout her presentation. "Before we end, I want to emphasize something about this algorithm's development," she said, her voice carrying a new note of personal conviction. "Innovation doesn't conform to our expectations about who can create it or where it might emerge." My work began in a high school computer lab on Chicago's South Side, developed through public library resources and online courses, refined through countless nights of coding and testing while my peers were doing typical teenage activities. The audience listened with rapt attention as she continued. "I share that context not to highlight obstacles, but to emphasize that talent and contribution can come from anywhere, if we're willing to recognize it. The aviation industry faces complex challenges that require diverse perspectives and fresh approaches. My algorithm is one such approach, but there are countless others waiting to be discovered and developed if we create spaces where all innovators are welcomed and valued." The simple statement, dignified rather than accusatory, connected yesterday's discrimination incident with today's technical presentation in a way that elevated both discussions. This wasn't about a single flight attendant's bias or one passenger's mistreatment, but about systemic patterns that potentially limited innovation across an entire industry. As Zoe concluded her presentation, the audience rose in a standing ovation that reflected appreciation not just for her technical contribution, but for the grace and perspective she had demonstrated throughout a challenging situation. Director Harmon joined her at the podium, speaking briefly into the microphone. "This is precisely the kind of innovation the FAA is committed to supporting and implementing," she stated firmly. "Ms. Jackson, we would like to invite you to join our advisory committee on next-generation aviation efficiency. Your perspective would be invaluable to our ongoing work." The invitation, unexpected and prestigious, represented institutional recognition of her expertise at the highest level of aviation regulation. It wasn't charity or compensation for yesterday's incident, but genuine acknowledgement of her professional contributions. As the session concluded, audience members approached with business cards, implementation questions, and collaboration proposals. Skyway's technology team requested a follow-up meeting. Representatives from Boeing, Airbus, and other major manufacturers expressed interest in testing her algorithm with their flight management systems. "Your integration approach is brilliant," a senior engineer from Airbus told her. "We've been trying to solve this exact problem for years with much more complex solutions. The elegance of your method is that it works within existing systems rather than requiring comprehensive redesign." Nash Peterson watched from nearby, smiling at the transformation. Yesterday, Zoe had been questioned about her right to occupy a first-class seat. Today, industry leaders were competing for her attention and expertise. Outside the auditorium, media representatives waited to speak with her. Aviation Week requested an interview focused on her technical innovation. Industry publications wanted details about implementation timelines. Mainstream news outlets sought her perspective on the broader implications of yesterday's incident. With Sofia Mendez's guidance, Zoe navigated these requests strategically, prioritizing technical discussions about her algorithm while addressing the discrimination incident with measured perspective rather than personal grievance. Yesterday's experience highlighted challenges that many face in professional environments. She told one interviewer, "What matters most is that these incidents prompt meaningful changes in both individual behavior and institutional policies. My focus remains on contributing to aviation's future through innovations like my efficiency algorithm." Throughout the day, the conference atmosphere continued to reflect the dual impact of her presence. Technical appreciation for her algorithm, alongside broader conversations about inclusivity and recognition in aviation spaces. Sessions on diversity in STEM fields saw unexpectedly high attendance. Panel discussions referenced the incident as a case study in both what goes wrong and how communities can respond effectively. By late afternoon, Zoe's presentation had been rated the highest of any session in the conference's first day. Attendees highlighted both technical content and delivery in their evaluations. Industry publications were already preparing features on her algorithm's potential impact. Implementation discussions had begun with multiple airlines, including Skyway, and in a quiet moment between sessions, she received an unexpected message. A brief email from Karen Reynolds, the flight attendant whose actions had sparked the entire situation. Miss Jackson, I recognize that no apology can adequately address my behavior yesterday. My actions were inexcusable and reflected biases I didn't want to acknowledge. Watching your presentation today made the consequences of such bias painfully clear, not just for individuals, but for an entire industry that needs voices and innovations like yours. I am facing appropriate professional consequences for my actions. More importantly, I am confronting the personal work needed to ensure I never again allow prejudice to blind me to someone's humanity and potential. You deserve better, as does everyone who encounters our industry. The message wasn't seeking forgiveness or absolution, just acknowledging responsibility and impact without excuses or deflection. Zoe didn't respond immediately, recognizing that this was part of Karen's journey rather than an obligation she needed to address. As the conference day concluded, Zoe found herself surrounded by a different kind of recognition than she had anticipated when beginning this journey. Beyond the technical validation of her algorithm, she had catalyzed conversations about belonging, recognition, and the systems that either nurture or suppress diverse talents in technical fields. Tomorrow she would return to Chicago, to the high school computer lab where her algorithm had first taken shape, to the community that had supported her journey despite limited resources and abundant skepticism. She would return with validation not just of her technical brilliance, but of her right to occupy spaces where that brilliance could make its greatest impact. The conference presentation had transformed what began as discrimination into a powerful demonstration of contribution, showing precisely what industries lose when they fail to recognize talent based on preconceptions about what innovation looks like or who can create it. And that demonstration would continue to resonate long after the conference concluded, influencing not just technical implementations but institutional cultures and individual awareness across an industry poised for transformation. Part 10, Systemic Change begins. Skyway Airlines announces comprehensive inclusivity initiative following discrimination incident. The headline appeared across industry publications exactly 1 week after Flight 2187. The announcement detailed a sweeping program of reforms developed in direct response to Zoe Jackson's experience. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, developed in consultation with diversity experts and incorporating real-world scenarios, and bystander intervention techniques. Establishment of the Jackson Innovation Scholarship for underrepresented students pursuing aviation careers. With an initial endowment of $2.5 million, creation of a passenger advocacy office with direct reporting lines to executive leadership, bypassing traditional customer service channels for discrimination concerns, revised seating policies, eliminating discretionary downgrading of passengers with valid boarding passes, and requiring documented supervisor approval for any seat changes, implementation of body camera pilot program for flight attendants to ensure accountability and documentation in passenger interactions. The comprehensive response reflected Skyway's recognition that this situation demanded more than standard damage control or public relations messaging. What had happened to Zoe Jackson wasn't an isolated incident, but a symptom of systemic issues that required substantive structural changes. We are under no illusion that policy changes alone will transform culture. Edward Thompson stated in the accompanying press release, "This initiative represents the beginning of a journey toward creating an airline where every passenger is treated with equal dignity and respect, regardless of appearance, age, or background." The incident on Flight 2187 revealed gaps between our stated values and operational reality that we are committed to addressing. The announcement included confirmation of Karen Reynolds' termination following the completion of the internal investigation, which had found clear evidence of discriminatory treatment in violation of multiple company policies. Miguel Hernandez, who had initially failed to intervene but later acknowledged his complicity, had been reassigned to assist with developing the new training program, specifically addressing bystander responsibility and intervention techniques. "My own experience demonstrates why intervention matters," Miguel explained in an interview with Aviation Today. "Silent witnesses enable discriminatory patterns to continue. Teaching staff how to recognize and address problematic behaviors in the moment is essential to creating sustained cultural change." In Washington, D.C., the ripple effects continued to spread through regulatory channels. FAA Director Rachel Harmon had convened a special committee to review industry-wide practices related to passenger treatment and employee training. What happened to Ms. Jackson highlights vulnerabilities in our current system. Director Harmon noted during the committee's first meeting. When a brilliant young innovator can be publicly humiliated while traveling to present work that could transform our industry, we must ask ourselves what other contributions we're losing due to barriers of bias and exclusion. The committee included representatives from major airlines, passenger advocacy groups, and diversity experts from other industries with successful inclusion initiatives. Their mandate extended beyond addressing individual incidents to examining structural factors that enabled discriminatory treatment throughout commercial aviation. Meanwhile, Zoe's algorithm had begun initial testing with 3 major airlines, including Skyway. The preliminary results confirmed her projected efficiency improvements, with fuel consumption reductions averaging 8.7% across multiple aircraft types and route structures. The potential industry-wide impact is substantial, noted Aviation Weekly in its technical analysis. If implemented across the commercial fleet, this algorithm could reduce annual fuel costs by approximately $2.4 billion while significantly decreasing aviation's carbon footprint, a rare innovation that addresses both economic and environmental concerns simultaneously. Skyway had moved aggressively to implement the algorithm across its fleet, partly in recognition of its technical merits and partly as visible demonstration of their commitment to valuing Zoe's contributions beyond performative apologies or compensation. We are proud to be the first airline implementing Ms. Jackson's innovative approach to flight efficiency. Their implementation announcement stated, "This represents both sound business practice and acknowledgement that diverse perspectives drive technical innovation." The Jackson Innovation Scholarship had received initial funding of $5 million from Skyway, with additional contributions from industry partners, bringing the total endowment to over $4 million. The program would provide comprehensive support for 10 students annually from underrepresented communities pursuing aviation-related education, including tuition, mentorship, and guaranteed internship placements. This scholarship isn't charity or compensation, Zoe emphasized during the program's launch. It's recognition that our industry's future depends on nurturing talent wherever it exists. Many brilliant minds never enter aviation because they don't see themselves represented or welcomed in these spaces. This program aims to change that reality. Dr. Peterson had become a key ally in these efforts, leveraging her position at MIT to create additional pathways for diverse students interested in aviation technology. Their initial connection during Flight 2187 had evolved into a meaningful professional relationship centered on both technical collaboration and systemic change. What impressed me most about Zoe wasn't just her algorithm's elegance. Dr. Peterson told an interviewer from Aviation Today, "It was her ability to maintain dignity and focus on contribution even when faced with direct discrimination. That resilience is as valuable to our industry as any technical innovation." Miguel Hernandez had undergone a profound professional transformation, speaking candidly about his initial failure to intervene when witnessing discrimination. "I recognized what was happening was wrong," he acknowledged during a training session for other flight attendants. "But I allowed concerns about challenging a senior colleague to override my responsibility to ensure equal treatment of all passengers. That passive complicity enables discriminatory systems to persist." His honest self-assessment, acknowledging responsibility without making excuses, provided a powerful model for other employees examining their own roles in maintaining or challenging problematic behaviors within organizational cultures. Captain Blackwell had emerged as a respected voice on inclusivity within commercial aviation, drawing on his 22 years of experience as one of the few African-American pilots in Skyway's fleet. What happened on Flight 2187 wasn't an isolated incident, but the visible manifestation of patterns that exist throughout our industry, he noted during a panel discussion on aviation culture. The question isn't whether these patterns exist, but what each of us chooses to do when we witness them, remain silent or take action that aligns with our stated values. His perspective carried particular weight coming from someone with both the technical expertise and lived experience to address these issues authentically rather than theoretically. Congressional hearings on discrimination in commercial transportation had been scheduled, with both Zoe and representatives from Skyway invited to testify about their experiences and the changes implemented in response. The hearings would examine whether additional federal regulations or oversight mechanisms were needed to ensure equal treatment across the industry. The incident had also catalyzed conversations about representation and inclusion across adjacent STEM fields, with professional associations examining their own practices and establishing more robust guidelines for conference participation, speaker selection, and community standards. What makes this situation different from many discrimination incidents is the comprehensive response, noted Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a diversity consultant working with multiple airlines. Rather than treating it as a public relations problem to be managed, Skyway and the broader aviation community have approached it as an opportunity for genuine transformation. The test will be whether these initial changes translate into sustained commitment when media attention inevitably fades. That was the crucial question underlying all these developments. Would this moment of recognition and reform endure beyond the immediate crisis? Would the systems being established continue to function when public scrutiny diminished? Would the industry's commitment to inclusion remain strong when tested by future challenges? For Zoe Jackson, these questions remain secondary to her primary focus, continuing to develop innovations that addressed aviation's technical challenges while mentoring other young people interested in similar paths. My algorithm was never about gaining recognition or proving my worth, she explained during a speech at her former high school in Chicago. It was about solving a problem that mattered, making air travel more efficient and environmentally sustainable. That remains my focus, regardless of how others perceive me or question my belonging. This perspective, centered on contribution rather than validation, had characterized her response throughout the entire situation. From her composed reaction during the initial discrimination to her technically focused conference presentation to her emphasis on systemic solutions rather than personal grievance, she had consistently elevated the conversation beyond individual incidents to broader patterns and possibilities. As the one-week mark passed, the initial wave of media attention began to subside, but the work of transformation continued across multiple dimensions. Skyway's bias training program was being developed with input from experts and affected communities. The Jackson Innovation Scholarship was finalizing its application criteria and outreach strategies. The algorithm testing expanded to international carriers interested in its efficiency benefits. Systemic change had begun, imperfect and incomplete, but substantive and meaningful. The incident that had started with discrimination had catalyzed conversations, commitments, and concrete actions that extended far beyond a single flight or passenger experience. And for the aviation industry, that represented both challenge and opportunity. The challenge of confronting entrenched patterns that limited human potential, and the opportunity to create systems where innovation could flourish regardless of its source. The journey was just beginning, but the direction had been clearly established. What remained was the sustained commitment required to transform initial responses into lasting change, the kind of change that would ensure future innovators faced fewer barriers and greater recognition than those who had come before. Part 11, Long-Term Impact. 6 months after Flight 2187, how one incident transformed an industry. The special report from Aviation Monthly examined the substantial changes implemented across commercial aviation in the half-year following Zoe Jackson's experience. The transformation extended far beyond Skyway Airlines to include industry-wide reforms, regulatory adjustments, and cultural shifts that had fundamentally altered how airlines approached inclusion, accountability, and innovation. 7 major airlines had implemented comprehensive bias training programs modeled after Skyway's initiative. The industry-standard curriculum now included specific modules addressing unconscious bias, intervention strategies for witnessing discrimination, and accountability mechanisms for ensuring equal treatment of all passengers. Skyway's implementation of Zoe's efficiency algorithm had yielded remarkable results during its first quarter of operation. Fuel consumption had decreased by 2% across their fleet, translating to approximately $37 million in savings while significantly reducing carbon emissions. The financial and environmental benefits had accelerated adoption across the industry, with 4 additional carriers implementing the system and 11 more in various stages of testing and integration. The technical contribution alone would cement Ms. Jackson's legacy in aviation innovation, the article noted. But her impact extends far beyond algorithm development to include fundamental changes in how our industry recognizes and nurtures diverse talents. The Jackson Innovation Scholarship had selected its inaugural cohort of 10 students from underrepresented communities pursuing aviation careers. The comprehensive program provided not only financial support, but mentorship, internship placements, and a community of peers navigating similar paths through predominantly white and male spaces. This scholarship isn't about creating exceptions, Zoe had explained during the program's launch. It's about removing barriers that prevent exceptional talents from contributing to our industry. Every field benefits when its participants reflect diverse perspectives and experiences. Captain Blackwell had been appointed to head Skyway's new inclusivity initiative, leveraging his 22 years of experience to reshape training programs, hiring practices, and accountability mechanisms throughout the airline. His approach emphasized practical strategies rather than theoretical frameworks, focusing on specific behaviors and systems that either promoted or hindered equal treatment. Inclusion isn't about good intentions or corporate statements, he noted in an industry keynote address. It's about concrete actions that demonstrate our values, recognizing talent regardless of its package, addressing bias when it appears, and creating environments where everyone can contribute their best work. Karen Reynolds had completed a mandatory bias education program as part of her separation agreement with Skyway. While her airline career had ended, she had begun speaking candidly about her experience as part of corporate training programs in other industries. "I didn't think of myself as biased," she acknowledged during one such session. "I saw myself as maintaining standards and protocols. What I failed to recognize was how those standards were shaped by assumptions about who belonged in premium spaces and who didn't. That blindness cost me my career, but more importantly, it reflected patterns that limit human potential across countless organizations." Her honest assessment, without excuses or deflection, provided a powerful case study in how unconscious bias operates and the consequences it creates both for individuals and institutions. Miguel Hernandez had been promoted to a training position focused on bystander intervention techniques, teaching other employees how to recognize and address discriminatory behavior in the moment rather than remaining passive witnesses. "The most common response when witnessing bias isn't overt support but silent discomfort," he explained during a training session. "That silence becomes complicity when it allows discriminatory treatment to continue unchallenged. Our responsibility extends beyond our own actions to include how we respond when witnessing others' behavior." His personal evolution, from hesitant bystander to active advocate, modeled the kind of transformation needed at both individual and institutional levels. Passenger complaints related to discriminatory treatment had decreased 64% across the industry, reflecting both improved training and heightened accountability. The Federal Aviation Administration had implemented new reporting mechanisms that tracked bias incidents separately from general customer service issues, creating more transparent metrics for measuring progress and identifying problems. Director Rachel Harmon had made inclusion a central focus of the FAA's regulatory approach, integrating equity considerations into everything from passenger rights frameworks to technical certification processes. Aviation safety that has always depended on identifying and addressing potential failure points in our systems. She noted in congressional testimony, "The incident on Flight 2187 highlighted failure points of a different kind, ones that prevent our industry from benefiting from all available talents and perspectives. Addressing these vulnerabilities is as essential to our future as any technical safety protocol." The Passenger Advocacy Office established by Skyway had become an industry model, with direct reporting lines to executive leadership and transparent metrics for tracking resolution of discrimination complaints. 4 other major carriers had implemented similar structures, creating accountability mechanisms that elevated these concerns above standard customer service processes. Dr. Peterson and Zoe had developed a formal mentorship program connecting established aviation professionals with young innovators from underrepresented communities. The initiative provided both technical guidance and strategic advice for navigating industry dynamics while maintaining focus on contribution rather than validation. What happened 6 months ago represented both failure and possibility. Dr. Peterson reflected in the Aviation Monthly feature, "The failure of our systems to recognize brilliant contributions regardless of their source, and the possibility of transforming those systems to nurture rather than suppress diverse talents. The progress we've made is significant but incomplete, a foundation for continued evolution rather than a finished solution." For Zoe herself, the 6-month mark represented a transition point. Her algorithm had moved from testing to implementation across multiple airlines. Her mentorship program had expanded to include high school students interested in aviation careers. Her advocacy had shifted from responding to a personal experience to addressing systemic patterns that affected countless others. The most meaningful outcome isn't the recognition my work has received, she noted in a rare personal interview. It's the doors being opened for others who might previously have been overlooked or discouraged. Innovation thrives when we create environments where everyone's contributions are evaluated on merit rather than filtered through preconceptions about who can create value. This perspective, focused on collective progress rather than individual validation, had characterized her approach throughout the entire situation. From her composed reaction during the initial discrimination to her emphasis on systemic solutions rather than personal grievance, she had consistently elevated the conversation beyond specific incidents to broader patterns and possibilities. The long-term impact extended beyond formal policies and programs to include subtle cultural shifts across the aviation community. Conference panels now routinely included diverse perspectives rather than treating them as special editions. Technical innovations were evaluated on their merits regardless of their creators' backgrounds or credentials. Accountability for discriminatory behavior that had become an industry expectation rather than an unusual response to public pressure. These changes weren't perfect or complete. Biased assumptions still appeared in individual interactions. Structural barriers still limited access and opportunity for many potential contributors. The work of transformation remained ongoing and incomplete, but the direction had been clearly established, and the momentum continued to build. What had begun as discrimination on a single flight had catalyzed conversations, commitments, and concrete actions that extended far beyond that isolated incident to address patterns that had limited human potential throughout the industry. As Aviation Monthly concluded in its special report, the true measure of this transformation won't be found in corporate statements or initial policy changes, but in the experiences of future innovators who find their contributions recognized and valued regardless of how they look, where they come from, or whether they conform to traditional expectations about who belongs in aviation's most influential spaces. That was the legacy taking shape 6 months after Flight 2187. Not just technical implementation of a brilliant algorithm, but fundamental recalibration of systems that determined whose innovations were seen, valued, and implemented throughout commercial aviation. And for Zoe Jackson, that represented the most meaningful outcome of all, the possibility that future contributors might focus entirely on their work rather than battling for recognition of their fundamental dignity and worth. The most powerful response to discrimination isn't outrage, but excellence. Zoe Jackson's words resonated throughout the packed auditorium as she addressed the National Aviation Conference 1 year after Flight 2187. The anniversary had prompted reflection across the industry about what had changed, what remained unfinished, and what lessons had been absorbed from an incident that began with one flight attendant's biased assumptions and evolved into industry-wide transformation. Excellence doesn't erase or excuse discrimination, she continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had demonstrated throughout this journey. But it creates an undeniable counterpoint to the narratives that attempt to diminish our capabilities and contributions. The algorithm she had presented a year earlier was now implemented across 70% of commercial airlines operating in North America, generating approximately $1.8 billion in annual fuel savings while significantly reducing carbon emissions across the industry. The technical innovation that Karen Reynolds had assumed she couldn't possibly possess had transformed aviation efficiency in precisely the ways she had projected. But today's address focused less on technical specifications than on the human systems that either nurture or suppress innovation across industries and communities. The question isn't whether brilliance exists in unexpected places, Zoe noted, but whether our systems are designed to recognize and cultivate it wherever it appears. Every field benefits when we remove the filters of bias and preconception that prevent us from seeing capabilities that don't conform to our expectations. The Jackson Innovation Scholarship had expanded to 20 students annually, creating pathways for diverse talents to enter aviation through education, mentorship, and guaranteed industry placements. Skyway's Inclusivity Initiative, originally developed in response to the discrimination incident, had evolved into a comprehensive approach that influenced hiring, training, advancement, and accountability throughout the airline. But perhaps the most profound changes had occurred in less visible dimensions, in the heightened awareness among industry professionals about how biased assumptions shape interactions, in the increased willingness of bystanders to intervene when witnessing discrimination, and in the shifting cultural expectations about whose contributions deserve recognition and implementation. What happened on that flight revealed patterns that exist throughout our industry and society, Zoe acknowledged. The difference wasn't that discrimination occurred. That happens daily in countless settings. The difference was that a community of witnesses chose to document, challenge, and address it rather than remaining passive observers. Her words highlighted the critical role played by passengers on Flight 2187, whose collective action had transformed an individual incident of discrimination into a catalyst for systemic change. Dr. Peterson documenting discrepancies in treatment, James Rodriguez recording interactions for accountability, the elderly couple offering their seats in solidarity, Captain Blackwell using his authority to reset expectations and values. None of us can transform systems alone, Zoe continued, but each of us can choose whether to witness injustice as passive observers or active participants in creating accountability. That choice, multiplied across countless interactions, determines whether discriminatory patterns persist or evolve toward more equitable alternatives. This perspective, focused on collective responsibility rather than individual blame, had characterized her approach throughout the entire journey. From her composed reaction during the initial discrimination to her emphasis on structural solutions rather than personal grievance, she had consistently elevated the conversation beyond isolated incidents to address underlying patterns and possibilities. If there's a lesson in what happened 1 year ago, she concluded, it's that our choices in moments of witness matter profoundly. When we document rather than ignore, when we intervene rather than remain silent, when we recognize brilliance regardless of its package, we create environments where innovation can flourish and human potential can be fully expressed. The standing ovation that followed reflected not just appreciation for her technical contributions, but recognition of the wisdom and perspective she had brought to an industry grappling with its own biases and limitations. As she left the stage, surrounded by colleagues and supporters, the contrast with her treatment 1 year earlier couldn't have been more profound. From being told she didn't belong in first class to receiving the industry's highest recognition for technical innovation, from having her legitimate boarding pass questioned to having her algorithm implemented across global aviation systems, from experiencing discrimination based on appearance to catalyzing transformation based on brilliance. The journey hadn't been simple or linear. The changes implemented weren't perfect or complete. The work of creating truly inclusive systems remained ongoing and unfinished, but the direction had been clearly established, and the momentum continued to build. What had begun as discrimination on a single flight had evolved into a movement for recognition, accountability, and transformation that extended far beyond a specific incident or individual to address patterns that had limited human potential throughout the industry. That was the enduring impact of Flight 2187, not just the implementation of a brilliant algorithm, but the fundamental recalibration of systems that determined whose innovations were seen, valued, and implemented throughout commercial aviation. And for anyone watching these developments unfold, the message was clear. Discrimination persists in countless settings, from corporate boardrooms to classroom discussions to customer service interactions. But the response to witnessing such treatment, whether to document, challenge, and address it or remain passive and complicit, determines whether these patterns continue unchecked or evolve toward more equitable alternatives. The choice belongs to each of us in every moment of witness, and those choices, multiplied across countless interactions, create the systems that either limit or liberate human potential in all its diverse and brilliant forms. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might find it meaningful. Your support helps us continue bringing these important narratives to light. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and taken action? Or perhaps remained silent and later wished you'd spoken up? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story could inspire others to make different choices in moments of witness. Remember, change happens one interaction at a time, one voice at a time, one moment of witness at a time. Together, we can create communities and systems where everyone's dignity and contributions are recognized and valued. Hit the notification bell to be alerted when we release our next story about transformation through adversity and the power of speaking truth to injustice.